Falcone murder, my uncle was working on ways to beat the case. The first thing we did was put together our defense team. Harold Garber, who was around us and was very close with my uncle, would represent my uncle in the trial. I used Edwin Jacobs, and Lawrence used a Philadelphia lawyer named Bobby Simone. Bobby made a name for himself representing a lot of made guys in Philadelphia, and him and my uncle had become friendly. Jury selection was set to begin in early September 1980. I had moved into the Claridge Hotel and Casino during the trial, so that I wouldn't be distracted. This trial meant everything to us. It was literally life or death for us. The state of New Jersey v. Nicodemo Scarfo et al. Got underway in the Atlantic County Courthouse on Main Street in Mays Landing, approximately 15 miles away from Atlantic City. The prosecutor was a man named Jeffrey Blitz, and we knew he hated us. The judge was a man named William Miller, and they had brought him in from another county to try the case. In the beginning of the case, the judge granted a motion by one of the television stations that would have allowed the trial to be broadcast live on television each day. At the time, this was unheard of. That's how big this trial was. I remember pulling up the first day of the trial. We were in my uncle's Cadillac. A man named Ed Harrell, who worked for Bobby Simone as a private investigator, was driving the car, and Bobby was in the front seat. Ed was an absolute gentleman. He was a black guy and had been involved with Martin Luther King Jr. in the 60s. How he ended up with Bobby, or with me, my uncle, and Lawrence, I'll never know. As we're pulling up, there were news cameras and reporters everywhere. My uncle said, "Jesus Christ, Bobby, are they here for us?" And Bobby said, "I'm afraid so." Ed dropped us off in the front of the courthouse, and we walked through the crowd. Bobby was saying no comment as we pushed our way through. Inside, we met Harold Garber and Ed Jacobs. Now, when it comes time for opening arguments, Harold was the first to go. He was representing my uncle. He got up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Harold Garber, and I represent Nicodemo Scarfo. The evidence in this case will show that Mr. Scarfo is not guilty. Thank you." And then he sat down. That was his whole opening argument. If my uncle could have killed him right there, he would have. Ed Jacobs and Bobby Simone used their opening arguments to destroy the credibility of Joe Salerno, who was the state's star witness. 9 months removed from that fateful night in Margate, where Philip Leonetti pumped 2 bullets into Vincent Falcone, Joe Salerno and his family had already been whisked away from Brigantine and placed in the Witness Protection Program and relocated to Topeka, Kansas, where they were given new names and new identities. Now, wearing a bulletproof vest and under the guard of U.S. Marshals carrying machine guns, Joe Salerno was back in town. I remember when Joe Salerno took the witness stand, we were trying to ice him, trying to scare him, but he never once looked in our direction the whole time he testified, and he was no less than 10 feet away from us. The prosecutor had him tell the story of how he met us and how I had loaned him money and how he had given my uncle the guns. He told them everything. That night we all went out to dinner. Me, my uncle, Lawrence, Harold, Bobby, Ed Jacobs, and I think Chucky was with us. We went to Caesar's. We were discussing the best ways to attack Joe Salerno's credibility. We were all very focused on winning this trial. It was as if nothing else was going on around us. Well, except for the thing with Johnny Keys. Johnny Keys Simone had been a made member of the Bruno crime family for a number of years and operated out of the Trenton area. Simone, who was 70 years old, was a distant cousin of Bruno's and had formed a close relationship with the Gambino crime family in New York through a Trenton-based Gambino capo named Nicky Russo, who reported directly to Gambino boss Paul Castellano and had been one of the Yardville Nine in the early 70s with Angelo Bruno and Nicky Scarfo. Simone was sending messages to Castellano through Russo that he was interested in taking out Phil Testa and becoming boss of the Philadelphia mob, much the same way Antonio Tony Bananas Caponegro had tried to do with Angelo Bruno. But Caponegro and Bruno were now both dead. Word gets back to my uncle that Johnny Keys was plotting against Phil Testa, and was doing so through the Gambinos. My uncle reports this to Bobby Manna in New York, and Bobby says he is going to look into it. A few days later, Bobby sent word down that he is sending a kid down named Sammy Gravano, who is with the Gambinos, to talk to us about it. He tells us we can trust him, that this Sammy is La Cosa Nostra, and respected by all of the families in New York. Sammy was known as a hitter, a killer, and Bobby said to my uncle and me, "This guy is your kind of guy." So one night Sammy comes down, and we meet him inside the lobby lounge at Bally's Park Place for a couple of drinks to get acquainted, and then we take him to Angelo's for dinner. It's me, him, and my uncle. He tells us, "Look, I don't know this guy Johnny Keys, and quite frankly, I don't give a fuck. He's trying to make problems for you and your family, then me and my crew are going to make problems for him. I got the okay from Paul to whack this guy out for talking treason against your boss. Just give me some time, and it will be done. Me and my crew are going to handle this guy personally." I could tell that my uncle was impressed by him, and the manner in which he carried himself. He was very respectful and very straightforward. There was no bullshit with him. We ended up having a very nice dinner and spent a couple of hours talking about La Cosa Nostra. Sammy knew this thing inside and out. That was the first time I met Sammy the Bull, and it wouldn't be the last. A few weeks later, the bullet-ridden body of Johnny Keys Simone was found in a Staten Island landfill. The hit team, led by the up-and-coming Gambino family hitman, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, had kidnapped Simone from the parking lot of a posh country club on the outskirts of Trenton and drove him to a secluded area in Staten Island and pumped several bullets into the back of his head. When we heard that Sammy's crew had killed Johnny Keys, we were relieved. It gave us the opportunity to focus our attention on our trial. Now, this trial was live on TV every day. We had the highest ratings in the area. At the time, there was a show on TV called Shogun, which was the #1 show, and we beat them in the ratings. But Joe Salerno was telling the jury everything about the night we killed Vince. Every detail. How I pulled out the gun, how I shot him, what I said. He gave the jury a play-by-play of everything that happened. I thought to myself, we're dead. We're finished. When it's time for cross-examination, Harold and Ed Jacobs did a good job of going at him, but Lawrence's lawyer, Bobby Simone, destroyed him. Bobby made Joe Salerno look like a liar, even though every word he was saying was the truth. Now, Joe Salerno was the state's whole case. If we were able to neutralize him, we had a shot at winning. Now, when the state rested, we had a meeting. It was all the defendants and all the lawyers. We were in one of those little conference rooms in the courthouse. Bobby Simone said, "I think I can win a motion to dismiss on behalf of Lawrence based on the fact that he didn't pull the trigger or order the murder. If I make the motion and win, me and Lawrence are out of the case." Now, like I said before, Bobby was the best lawyer I have ever seen try a case. He had destroyed Joe Salerno on the stand. I wanted him in the case for closing arguments, and so did my uncle. My uncle asked the lawyers to step outside for a few minutes so that me, him, and Lawrence could talk privately. My uncle said, "What do you want to do, Lawrence? Do you want Bobby to do that motion for you?" Now, Lawrence knows if Bobby does the motion, he's probably going to win it, and he would go home free. Lawrence knows that I am on the hook more than anyone because Joe Salerno ID'd me as the killer. Lawrence turns to me and he says, "What do you think, Philip? What should I do?" Now, I'm torn, because if I tell Lawrence to do the motion and he wins, Bobby Simone can't do the closing argument, and I thought my best chance of winning was Bobby speaking to the jury for all of us. The flip side is, Lawrence is my friend, and if he can get out of this thing, then it's better for him. I say, "I don't know, Lawrence, that's a tough one." Lawrence says to my uncle, "Nick, what do you think?" My uncle says, "I'd hate to lose, Bobby, but you do what you think is best for you." We bring the lawyers back in, and Bobby says to Lawrence, "So what are we doing about the motion?" And Lawrence looks at me and my uncle and says, "Fuck it, no motion. We win together or we lose together." I was so relieved. I hugged Lawrence and kissed him on the cheek. My uncle did too. We went back into court feeling like we had a good chance at winning. After closing arguments, we were feeling really good. Bobby was amazing. Harold waited until the end to tell me and my uncle that he knew one of the jurors, a guy who was a liquor salesman, and that the guy would not vote against us. So at best, Harold said the jury would be hung. My uncle said, "You knew that this whole time, and you wait until now to tell us?" This was the second time during the trial that my uncle looked like he wanted to kill Harold. I remember Bobby said, "Is that why your opening argument was only 30 seconds?" And everyone laughed. A few minutes later, they told us that the jury had reached a unanimous verdict. We all stopped laughing, and everyone got very serious. We thanked the lawyers, and they rushed off into the courtroom. Then me, my uncle, and Lawrence spoke privately for a few minutes, and my uncle said, "I think we're going to beat this thing." We all hugged and kissed each other on the cheek, and we went into the courtroom. My God, the place was packed. You couldn't even move. There were 1,000,000 reporters trying to get in, but all the detectives who had chased us over the years had taken up most of the seats. We had a few supporters of our own that came every day to cheer us on. There must have been 20 sheriff's officers all over the courtroom. It seemed like we were waiting forever for the judge to come out and read the verdict. Then someone yelled, "All rise!" And here comes the judge. You could cut the tension with a knife. I've never been more scared in my entire life. First, they read the charges off against Lawrence, and they say not guilty. Then they read my uncle's charges, and they say not guilty. Then they get to mine, and they say, Philip Leonetti, not guilty. Me, my uncle, and Lawrence all shake hands with the lawyers, and you should have seen the look on the faces of the prosecutor and the cops. My God, they looked like they were going to cry. As we were leaving, one of the reporters asked my uncle, "Is there anything that you'd like to say?" And my uncle looked into the television camera and said, "Thank God for the American jury system and an honest jury." I was standing right behind him when he said it, and you can see me smiling on TV. It felt like the weight of the world was off my shoulders. That night we had a big party on Georgia Avenue, and everyone came to celebrate. All the lawyers and their families came. Chucky was there, the Blade was there, Saul Kane, Vince Sausto, Salvi, all the guys from the neighborhood, and all the knockaround guys who were with us around Atlantic City. They all came down. At some point during the party, my uncle pulls me and Lawrence aside and said, "We got away with murder. We are very, very lucky. We got to be more careful from now on." But within weeks of the not guilty verdict, little Nicky was back to his murderous ways. Sindone was one of the guys who was involved in the plot to kill Ange, and him and my uncle hated each other. My uncle told Phil Testa that Sindone was a snake and that he couldn't be trusted. Phil Testa agreed. So we set him up, and Salvi took him to a house in South Philadelphia where Frank Monte was waiting inside to see him. When Sindone was shaking hands with Frank Monte, Chucky Merlino shot him in the head and killed him. Chucky hit him 3 times in the back of the head, and they dumped him in an alley behind a store in South Philadelphia. Phil Testa immediately sent word out that Sindone's entire operation was to be split between his killers, Salvi Testa, Chucky Merlino, and Frank Monte. Sindone's top lieutenant, Joseph Chicky Ciancalini, who was now aligned with Testa and Scarfo, would also receive a piece of the action and would oversee what remained of Sindone's crew. The year was almost over, but little Nicky's killing spree wasn't. John McCullough was the head of the Roofers Union in Philadelphia. He was a big Irish guy from northeast Philadelphia, and he had been very close to Ange. He was the guy Ange wanted to let organize the unions in Atlantic City instead of my uncle. Now, my uncle hated John McCullough. When I say hated, I mean he absolutely detested him. He used to call him that big Irish cocksucker, or the crew cut, things like that. Now, when Ange was alive, John McCullough was untouchable because he was with Ange. But with Ange gone, John McCullough was vulnerable. My uncle starts telling Phil Testa, "We got to kill this guy McCullough. He's interfering in the unions in Atlantic City, and he's costing me money." so Phil Testa gives my uncle the okay. When McCullough lost his bid to take over the unions through Ange, he started causing trouble in Local 54. He was trying to break the union, and it was costing us a lot of money. My uncle went to Raymond Long John Martirano, who was a member of our family, and who was close to McCullough, and told him, "I want you to help us kill this guy. He's no good." Long John says, "I'll do whatever you want me to do, Nick." This was a way to test a guy's loyalty, and at the same time eliminate a rival and show the guy that you were the power, that you were the muscle. This is how my uncle was. He wanted to kill everybody. Everyone was petrified of my uncle, because with him, it was kill, kill, kill. He didn't give a fuck. There was no talking. Even though Phil Testa was the boss, no one in our family was more powerful than my uncle. When the guys from New York wanted to discuss business with our family, they came and saw my uncle. When it was time to whack somebody out, it was my uncle who was calling the shots. He would determine who was going to die and who was going to kill them. So my uncle tells Long John, "I want you to use Al Didone on this thing." Now, Al Didone was part of the bartenders union out of Camden, the one with Ralph Natale, which was the other union that Ange was pushing to get into Atlantic City. My uncle figures this is a way of testing Al Didone's loyalty as well, since at one time that union was opposed to my uncle. He tells Long John that he will make Al Didone a business agent for Local 54 if he helps out with the killing, and if he doesn't, that he will kill him instead. As crazy as my uncle was, I guess you can say there was a method to his madness. On Tuesday, December 16, 1980, a delivery van pulled up outside the home of Philadelphia Roofers Union boss John McCullough in the Bustleton section of North Philadelphia. The delivery man was carrying poinsettias, the bright red flowers that are synonymous with Christmas, which was only 9 days away. McCullough's wife answered the door and let the delivery man inside the home, and he placed 2 plants on the kitchen table. Standing a few feet away, talking on a telephone that was attached to the wall, was John McCullough. McCullough nodded to the delivery man, and the delivery man nodded back. The delivery man told Mrs. McCullough that he had 1 more plant in the truck, and that he would be right back. John McCullough saw that his wife had $2 in her hand to tip the man upon his return, and put his hand over the phone and said, "It's Christmas time. Give him 3. When the delivery man reappeared, he was carrying the 3rd poinsettia and placed it on the table with the others. Without hesitation, he pulled out a .22 caliber handgun and fired 6 times into the head and neck of John McCullough at close range. The union boss slid to the floor as a pool of blood surrounded him. McCullough's wife screamed in horror as the gunman very calmly left the house, got back into his van, and drove away. John McCullough would no longer pose a threat to Nicky Scarfo's control over the unions in Atlantic City. He was dead. The night they killed McCullough, it was all over the news, the top story. My uncle was very happy until he learned that Long John didn't kill McCullough himself. He had used a civilian, some kid named Willard Moran. As for Al Didone, he always maintained he had nothing to do with the hit. My uncle went nuts. "This motherfucker used a civilian? Some fucking Irish kid? Jesus Christ!" Now my uncle wants to kill Long John for using this Moran kid to do the hit, but Phil Testa calms him down. He says, "Nick, if we keep killing everybody, there won't be anyone left." That year alone, Angelo Bruno, Antonio Tony Bananas Caponegro, Alfred Freddie Salerno, John Johnny Keys Simone, Frank the Barracuda Sindone, and John McCullough had all been murdered as part of a mob power struggle. And that's how 1980, the bloodiest year in the history of the Philadelphia mob, ended. Early in 1981, we learned that the U.S. Attorney's Office in Camden was going to indict my uncle for illegal possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. The case stemmed from a search warrant that was executed when they came to arrest us for the Falcone murder. They found a small .22 in one of my uncle's bedroom drawers. We knew it was coming, and we expected my uncle to do some time. Now at this time, I was starting to get more involved in some of the other unions in Atlantic City. We controlled all of them. My uncle started giving me more responsibility now that I was made, and with the fact that he was likely going to prison at some point on the gun case. At this time, I started to make some inroads with a local politician named Mike Matthews, who wanted to become the mayor of Atlantic City. I had sent word to him that when the time was right, that he and I would meet, and we would discuss ways that we could help him get elected. I also helped make a guy we knew named Joe Pasquale, the chief of police in Atlantic City. We had the kind of power at that time where we could start a citywide strike with a single phone call and literally shut down the casinos. We also had the kind of power that if people didn't do what we told them to do, we'd kill them, and everyone knew that. That was one of the reasons my uncle was so big on the killings. When people knew that we are involved, all the games stopped, because they knew that we weren't fucking around. Around this time I got word that the president of one of the casinos wasn't going to sign a union contract with Local 54. I sent word to the president of the casino that if he didn't sign the contract that I personally would blow his brains out of his head. He signed the contract the next day. With little Nicky slowing down slightly in anticipation of a federal prison term on the gun case, his nephew, Philip Crazy Phil Leonetti, was stepping in and running the day-to-day operations in Atlantic City. While Scarfo and Leonetti were transitioning their power to the Jersey Shore, Philip Testa was losing his on the streets of South Philadelphia. Basically, Chicky Narducci was back to his old tricks, the same stuff he was doing with Ange, the plotting against Phil Testa. He now started doing with the underboss, Pete Casella. Narducci tells Casella that if they whack out Phil Testa, and Casella becomes the boss, that he would give Casella $1 million so he could retire to Florida, and he could name Chicky Narducci the boss. This is how bad Chicky Narducci wanted to be the boss. He was willing to pay $1 million for it. Now, Chicky had 2 tons of money. He had millions of dollars, but he didn't have no real power, and that's what he wanted. Now, Pete Casella doesn't have 30 cents to his name, so when Narducci offers him the $1 million, he goes for it, and him and Narducci start the plot to kill Phil Testa. After the McCullough hit, me and my uncle were pretty much staying in Atlantic City and focusing on our operation, on our business. Even though my uncle was consigliere, we weren't going to Philadelphia a lot, so we were kind of out of the loop with what Narducci and Casella were up to. Now, you gotta remember, since the day my uncle came home from Yardville, I was literally by his side every day, morning, noon, and night. Where he went, I went. This is going on 8 or 9 years at this point. All these meetings, all these killings, all of this plotting. I had been charged with murder twice. We had just beaten the Falcone case. I was literally exhausted. Now, during our trial, my uncle tells me and Lawrence, if we win this thing, I'm taking you guys to Florida. I gotta tell you, I needed that trip, and so did my uncle. In this life, it's not 9 to 5. It's 24/7, especially with my uncle. He never stopped. So one day at the office, my uncle tells me and Lawrence, let's go down there for a few days and relax. We'll get some sun. We'll have a good time. This was the best news I'd heard in years, right up there with beating the Falcone case. So we fly down to Miami, and we are staying in a suite at the original Diplomat Hotel, which was in Hollywood, Florida. You should have seen this place. It was a 5-star resort from top to bottom. Me, my uncle, and Lawrence would sit at the pool and just relax, have a few drinks, and then we'd eat at the best restaurants in town. Even my uncle was relaxing. He said, we need to get down here more often. This is the life. Now, the night we get back to Philadelphia, Chucky is waiting for us at the airport. He has a look on his face. My uncle says, what's the matter? What's going on? Chucky says, Phil Testa says he needs to see you right away, and it can't wait. I think it's the beef between him and Chicky. My uncle says, okay, let's go. And that was it. The vacation was over. We head over to Phil Testa's restaurant on Bank Street in Old City for a meeting, and when we get there, it's Phil Testa, Frank Monte, and Salvi sitting in a back booth. It's me, my uncle, Chucky, and Lawrence, and we sit down in the booth. Phil Testa says, "Nick, thanks for coming. I wouldn't have called you here if it wasn't urgent." My uncle says, "What's going on?" So Phil Testa starts off by saying, "I think Chicky's making a move against me. I've been hearing things in the street, and on top of that, he came to see me last week and asked to borrow $50,000. Now, before we killed Sindone, Phil Testa borrowed $50,000 from him. That's how greedy these guys were. They'd borrow the money knowing the guy was going to get killed, and then they wouldn't have to pay the money back. That was the move that these guys did. Now, everybody knows the last thing Chicky Narducci needs is another $50,000. The guy is a multimillionaire. So Phil Testa is convinced that Chicky is doing to him what Phil Testa did to Sindone. My uncle says, "We gotta kill him. We gotta get him before he gets you." Phil Testa seems relieved. He says, "Thanks, Nick. I knew I could count on you." And he gives my uncle a kiss on the cheek. My uncle says, "We'll take a ride up tomorrow and figure this thing out. Don't worry about nothing." And then we drove back to Atlantic City. Our plan was to go back and see him the next day, but because of what happened a few hours later, that didn't happen. The explosion could be heard blocks away. Like an earthquake, it rocked an entire city. Dozens of police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances raced to the scene, as did dozens of people from the neighborhood, onlookers, many huddled together dressed in their pajamas, wearing sweatshirts and wrapped in blankets. After all, it was after 3 in the morning, and the air was crisp, permeated by the unmistakable scent of a fire that was slowly burning from within the smoldering heap that had once been the well-kept home of a man known to some as Philip Testa, but known to all as the Chicken Man, the boss of the Philadelphia mob. Within minutes, more than a half-dozen clean-shaven and nattily dressed men, wearing navy-blue flap jackets with the letters FBI emblazoned in bright yellow across their backs, were on the scene. Unlike most of the spectators present, these men, agents assigned to the FBI's organized crime unit, did not appear to have just woken up. It appeared quite the opposite. It appeared that these men never slept. As the crowd of curiosity seekers swelled behind the yellow crime scene tape, sleepy-eyed reporters joined the crowd, the lights from their television cameras illuminating the sky. Neighbors, friends, and family shrieked in horror when the gurney carrying a severely burned and mortally wounded Philip Testa was led from the rubble of his home to a nearby ambulance for the short trip to St. Agnes Hospital on Broad Street in the heart of South Philadelphia. The Chicken Man was dead, literally blown to pieces by a homemade bomb made of nails as he walked through the front door of his house after a late night out on the town. It was a brutal death for a brutal man that highlighted the ruthless and grisly dark side of a life often glamorized and romanticized. It was roughly 3 in the morning when Philip Testa returned to his home located on the 2100 block of Porter Street in South Philadelphia's posh Girard Estates neighborhood from picking up some late-night collections. He double-parked his car and made his way up his porch and to his front door. These would be the final steps of his life. If the 56-year-old Testa had been paying closer attention, he would have noticed the suspicious black Volkswagen van parked across the street from his house with a young South Philadelphia pizza maker and wannabe wise guy named Rocco Marinucci behind the wheel. Marinucci was known on the streets as Pete Casella's driver and protege. Even if Testa had realized what was going on around him, he probably couldn't have done much. Fate was already in motion. From the second Testa got out of his car, he was in the crosshairs. Underneath his porch was a makeshift bomb made up of carpenter's nails and 13 sticks of dynamite, rigged to a handheld detonator in the possession of Marinucci. Most likely, he didn't feel a thing. The explosion happened in an instant. As Testa reached for his front doorknob, Marinucci pushed a button and blew the Chicken Man into oblivion. Reverberations from the blast registered for miles. As the darkness of night gave way to the blinding bright light of dawn, many would casually dismiss the event with a shrug as just another mob hit, as they read their Philadelphia Inquirer or their Daily News and sipped their morning coffee. But they were wrong. This was anything but just another mob hit. It was the death of a sitting mob boss, the second such killing that had taken place in the city of Philadelphia in less than a year, as a complex struggle over money and power became deadly. The city of brotherly love had become the city of brotherly blood. The following year, New Jersey-born American rock icon Bruce Springsteen would release a song about it, immortalizing the event in pop culture lore. In the underworld, the killing of a mob boss like Philip Testa was akin to the assassination of a president. Like the earthquake that it resembled, the death of Philip Testa would produce seismic ripple effects and shake the foundation of the underworld in South Philadelphia and Atlantic City to its very core. The ensuing chaos would last for the next 3 decades. It was maybe 3:30, 3:45 in the morning when I got the call from Salvi. He said, "Philip, they killed my father." I was in bed, and I remember sitting straight up when he said it. I said, "Jesus Christ, Salvi, what happened?" And he said, "There was a bomb at the house and they blew him up. Those motherfuckers blew him up." You could hear the sadness in his voice, but I also heard the anger, the rage. He said, "Philip, I swear on my mother's grave when I find out who did this." And then his voice trailed off. I said, "Salvi, try and get some sleep. Me and my uncle will be up there in a few hours, and we will figure things out." And he said, "Okay, Philip, you guys come to the house." And then we hung up. So I get out of bed and I walk next door to my uncle's apartment, and I go in and I wake him up. It was like 4 in the morning, and he is dead asleep. So I'm nudging him and saying, "Uncle Nick, wake up." And right away, the second he sees me, he knows something's wrong, and he says, "What happened?" And I told him. I said, "Salvi just called. His father got killed. They blew his house up with a bomb." Without hesitation, my uncle is out of bed, and I follow him into his kitchen. His wife comes in and makes us coffee, and my uncle is just sitting there, staring straight ahead. Neither one of us are saying anything. After a few minutes, he takes a sip of his coffee, and he leans in close to me, and he says, "Do you know what this means?" And I nodded my head, yes. I knew that with Phil Testa dead, one of 2 things was going to happen. Either the guys who killed him were going to try and kill us, or we were going to try and kill them. Whoever was left standing, us or them, would take control of the family, the Philadelphia La Cosa Nostra. We sat there for a few more minutes, and my uncle was just staring straight ahead, and I could tell by looking at him he had a million thoughts racing through his head. This was it. This was kill or be killed for us, and it was like he was computing all of these different scenarios in his mind, who he could count on, who he had to watch, who he had to kill. He finished his coffee and got up from the table, and without saying a word, he started walking back to his bedroom. As he's walking away, he says, "I'm going back to bed for a few hours. Come down and get me around 10, and we will head up to Philadelphia." So I walk back over to my apartment, but my adrenaline is going and I can't get back to sleep. I'm lying there, and now my mind starts racing too. I started thinking of everything my uncle had taught me about this life since I was a little boy. All of the rules. I knew that death and murder were a part of our life. I started thinking of Ange, and how Caponegro had betrayed him, and now they were both dead. I thought about Vince Falcone, about how me and him killed Louis DeMarco together, and then I killed Vince. I thought about Phil Testa. I knew that Salvi or my uncle would kill whoever had killed him. The killings never stopped. I was thinking how in this life one day a guy is your friend, and the next day you're killing him or he's trying to kill you. This was what La Cosa Nostra was all about. But now the stakes were much, much higher. The March 15, 1981 bombing death of Philip "Chicken Man" Testa was the second time in less than a year that the boss of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob had been violently murdered, with the assassination of longtime Don Angelo Bruno having occurred on March 21, 1980. With Bruno and Testa gone, Nicodemo, little Nicky Scarfo, was in prime position to assume control of the family and become boss, and his nephew, Philip Leonetti, his protégé and heir apparent, was right by his side. Every day since he got out of Yardville, I was by his side. I drove him everywhere. Where he went, I went. I'd stay with him until he was in for the night, and I'd be there at whatever time he needed me the next day. That was my routine. That was my life in the beginning. And at 10 a.m. sharp, a few hours after the death of Philip Testa, Leonetti was dressed and ready to drive his uncle to Philadelphia to pay their respects to Salvi Testa and his family. Now, when I come down to get him, he's in a suit and tie. His hair is perfectly in place, and he seemed eager to get to Philadelphia. I don't think it was because he wanted to see Salvi and the family so much. I think it was because he knew guys like Pete Casella and Chicky Narducci would start making moves, and he wanted to be there so he could see who was doing what. My uncle says, "Get Lawrence and let's get on the road. I want to pick up Chucky at his house and then go see Salvi and his sister, and then we're going to get to the bottom of this thing and see what's going on." Now, I know that things are tense. I mean, they just killed the boss less than 12 hours ago. So I say to my uncle, "Do we need these?" And I make my hand like a gun. And he says, "If we do, we can get them up there," meaning Philadelphia. Remember, my uncle is out on bail on the gun possession case from the gun they found in his bedroom when they came to lock us up on the Falcone case. He knows that the cops know that we're driving up to Philadelphia. It's a 60-mile ride on the Atlantic City Expressway, a straight shot from Atlantic City right into South Philadelphia using the Walt Whitman Bridge. We could be pulled over and searched at any time. So my uncle is being extra cautious. "I don't need no more headaches with those motherfuckers," he said, meaning the law, and we got in the Cadillac and headed to Philadelphia. The news of the explosion that killed Philip Testa was the top story on local television, and rumors of who had been behind it began to circulate on the mob-infested streets of South Philadelphia. It takes us about an hour to drive up, and in the car no one is talking because we are always worried about listening devices. We get into the city, and we drive to Chucky's house, and he meets us outside. At the time, he was living around 9th and Jackson. We park the car, and me, my uncle, and Lawrence get out so we can talk to Chucky. Chucky goes right into what people are saying. It was a nail bomb. The word is it was the Irish and the Roofers Union as payback for us killing John McCullough. Right away, my uncle is shaking his head no. He says no fucking way an Irishman is killing the boss of a La Cosa Nostra family. They're crazy, but they're not that crazy. Not in a million fucking years. No way. So Chucky says, "Well, who do you think did it?" And my uncle says, "Well, it didn't come from New York. It didn't come from North Jersey. It didn't come from the Irish, and we didn't do it," meaning us guys in Atlantic City. "So it had to come from up here," meaning South Philadelphia. Just last night he was telling us about his problems with Chicky Narducci, so I'm guessing he has a hand in this. Then I said, "If Salvi gets wind of this, he'll kill Chicky right on the spot. He'll do it himself at the funeral. He won't give a fuck." My uncle says to me, "Chucky and Lawrence, we need to play dumb for now and see who does what, who lines up with who. We need to keep Salvi calm, and we need to find out exactly who did this, and then we will do what we gotta do." Meaning, kill them. So we get in the car and we drive over to the house, and Salvi is there with his sister and some members of his family. A few old-time guys that were around Phil Testa were also there. We get out and we pay our respects, and Salvi looked like he was ready to kill 1,000 guys. He said, "Nick, when I find out who did this, I'm doing them myself. I don't care who they are or who they're with." My uncle put his hands on his shoulder and looked him right in the eye and said, "We're going to get to the bottom of this, and whoever did this is going to get this." And he made the sign of the gun. "But we got to sit back and see who was involved in this treason. We can't do anything half-cocked." Salvi just nodded. While we're there, a lot of guys start coming around. Guys like Joey Pungitori and Gino Milano, who were tight with Salvi. My uncle nudges me and says, Look who's here, this treacherous cocksucker. And I look, and in comes Chicky Narducci with his sons Frank Jr. and Philip. They pay their respects to Salvi and his sister Maria, and then Chicky makes a beeline for my uncle. He says, "Nick, isn't this awful? Those no-good Irish motherfuckers did this to our friend." Now, my uncle knows that it's all bullshit about the Irish doing the killing, and he knows that in all likelihood Chicky Narducci was behind it. He knows, but at this moment he doesn't know enough that he's so certain, and he wanted us to purposely play dumb. My uncle says to Chicky, "What can we do, Chick? We gotta wait and see what happens, just like with Ange." What my uncle was saying is, we gotta wait and see what New York says. And Chicky kind of nods, but he looks confused by what my uncle said. These guys like Chicky Narducci didn't get it. They thought they could pick who the new boss was, but only New York can do that, and my uncle was the only guy that New York would speak to. So we hang around the house for a little while, and my uncle tells Salvi, "We're going to be here for a few days for the wake and the funeral, and we'll get to the bottom of this." In the days following Philip Testa's murder, 3 names emerged as his likely successor: Testa's hand-picked underboss, Pete Casella, his trusted friend and consigliere, Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo, and a renegade mob soldier named Harry the Hunchback Ricobene. My uncle was small, but Harry Ricobene was smaller. He was like 4 feet 10 inches and weighed 110 pounds. We called him the Hunch because he had a hunchback. Him and my uncle had hated each other for years, but Harry had his own crew, and he was the main guy in southwest Philadelphia. They ran gambling, loan sharking, and extortion rackets like we did, but Harry and his crew were mainly known as drug dealers, and my uncle detested drugs and drug dealers, so that's one reason we didn't like him. The other reason was that Harry never showed anybody any respect, and that he didn't follow the rules. My uncle used to say, "The way he behaves, he's not Cosa Nostra." Now Pete Casella, who Phil Testa picked as his underboss, he too was a drug dealer. He had just gotten out of jail for selling drugs. My uncle was the one who had Mickey Coco killed for selling drugs to Frank Monte's kid. He always said, "Drugs and our thing," meaning La Cosa Nostra, "don't mix." Scarfo's blind allegiance to La Cosa Nostra's strict edict against getting involved in the distribution of drugs may have been admirable to some mob traditionalists, but rules were meant to be broken, and in fact, Harry Ricobene and Pete Casella weren't the only mobsters who moonlighted as drug dealers. Lucky Luciano, the architect of the national La Cosa Nostra syndicate and the first boss of bosses, was heavily involved with the distribution of drugs, as were his underboss, Vito Genovese, and Genovese's protege, Vincent the Chin Gigante, who shared a cell with the powerful mafia don inside the massive fortress-like federal penitentiary USP Atlanta following a 1959 conviction for heroin trafficking. Following the murder of Angelo Bruno and the shift in power on the commission, Vincent the Chin Gigante, the boss of the Genovese family, was now the boss of all bosses, the supreme leader of the commission. Scarfo knew that Gigante, whom he considered a personal friend, would nominate him over Casella and Ricobene. When Ange got killed, the Chin wanted my uncle to become the next boss, but my uncle declined and told them that Phil Testa deserved it more. The Chin, through Bobby Manna, then ordered Phil Testa to make my uncle the underboss, or consigliere, and my uncle became the consigliere. Testa's choice of Pete Casella as his underboss would ultimately cost him his life. Now, in the days leading up to Phil Testa's wake, we were in South Philadelphia every day, me, my uncle, Chucky, and Lawrence. We were using a bar at 9th and Moyamensing called the 9M Bar, which was named after the streets it was on. From the time I knew Chucky, if he wasn't at his clubhouse on Shunk and Sarshan, you could find him at the 9M Bar. My uncle felt safe there. Now, at the time, the captains in the family were Freddie Aiezzi, Santo Idone, Joey Scafidi, Frank Monte, Johnny Capello, and Chicky Narducci. My uncle's captain before he became consigliere was Freddie Aiezzi, so we knew that he was with us. My uncle went way back with Santo Idone and Joe Scafidi, back to the Reds Caruso murder, so we knew that they were with us, and Frank Monte was very close with my uncle and Phil Testa. Remember, my uncle had Mickey Coco killed for selling drugs to Frank Monte's kid, so he was with us. We had everyone but Johnny Capello and Chicky Narducci. They were with Pete Casella. None of the captains were backing Harry Ricobene. My uncle had the support of 4 out of the 6 captains, and he knew he had New York support. But you gotta remember, not all these guys played by the rules. That's why Ange and Phil Testa were dead. So we go to the wake, and everybody's there, the whole organization. Members, associates, you name it. Everyone connected to La Cosa Nostra was there. While we were there, Chicky Narducci comes up to my uncle and says, "Nick, Pete Casella wants to see you after the wake to sort some things out. We want you to come to John Capello's house." Now, John Capello, who was a captain, is Pete Casella's brother-in-law. His house is the house where I got made. These guys knew my uncle was making moves with the other captains, and my uncle was now almost certain that Pete Casella was in on the plot against Phil Testa with Chicky Narducci. So this is it. This is the other side wanting to sit down with my uncle. My uncle tells Chicky, "I'll be there. Me and Chucky will come." And Chicky says, "Good, we'll straighten things out." Now I'm standing there, and I'm hearing all of this, and I look Chicky Narducci dead in his eye, and I say, "I want Johnny Capello with me and Lawrence at the 9M bar as insurance. He leaves when my uncle and Chucky come back from the meeting. If anyone else but my uncle or Chucky walk through that door, John Capello will be dead before they get their guns out. Do you understand me?" Now Chicky is taken aback, and he has this stunned look on his face, and my uncle has half a smile on his face, like he's proud I spoke up, and says, "That's what it is. John Capello waits with my nephew until me and Chucky get back." Chicky kind of stammers a bit and says, "Okay, Nick, we just want to talk, that's it." And my uncle says, "Fine, we'll be there." When Chicky was walking away, I caught him giving me a look. I guess he felt that because he was a caporegime, I shouldn't have talked to him like that, because I was just a soldier, and he was right. But if these guys weren't playing by the rules, why should I? I mean, Jesus Christ, they just whacked our boss out without approval from the commission, and he's going to give me the malocchio because he didn't like the way I spoke to him? My uncle sees what I'm seeing, and he says, "Your whole life, what have I told you about these ciggies? They are no fucking good. Greed and treason, that's all that's on their brain." Now my uncle moves right into action. He grabs Blackie Napoli, who was at the wake, and tells him to leave the wake and drive up to New York and set up a meeting with Bobby Manna for the next day, the day of the funeral, to discuss being named boss of the family. He told Blackie, "After you see Bobby, you turn around and drive back to the 9M and tell me what he said. You also tell him about this meeting at John Capello's house. I want him to know everything. We're not going back to Atlantic City until you come back. I don't care what time it is." Blackie says, "Got it," and he's out the door. My uncle tells Chucky, "Get 2 guns, one for Philip and one for Lawrence. I want a couple of guys with them at the 9M in case there's any trouble. I want everyone in that bar ready to go," meaning he wants everyone armed. Chucky says, "Okay, Nick," and he's out the door. My uncle looks at me and Lawrence and says, "This is it. You guys know what to do if there's any trouble." And we both nod. We left the wake and went straight to the 9M, and when we got there, Chucky was there with a few of his guys. We walk in and Chucky hands me and Lawrence pistols, and we sit at the bar and we're waiting for Johnny Capello. About a half hour later, here he comes, and when he comes in, Chucky frisked him for weapons. As Chucky is checking him, he raises his hands and looks at my uncle and says, "Come on, Nick, is this necessary?" And Chucky says, "He's clean." My uncle says, "It's just a precaution, John, that's all." And him and Chucky leave for the meeting. While we're sitting there, John Capello is trying to break the ice. He starts telling me and Lawrence the story about the Irish being behind Phil Testa's death. Me and Lawrence don't say nothing, and he's just talking, and I'm staring him dead in the eye as he's talking. I tell him, "You know, if something happens to my uncle or Chucky, you won't leave this bar alive. You know that, right?" And he looks at me and nods, and I say, "Let's have some drinks and see what happens." And after that, I don't think he said 2 words the rest of the night. Now, like I did with Chicky Narducci, I shouldn't be talking to John Capello like that. But I'm thinking he's with the guys who killed Phil Testa. In my mind, I was thinking that those guys would have killed me, my uncle, Chucky, Lawrence, Salvi, all of us. So in reality, I didn't give a fuck about none of them. On this day, the day of Phil Testa's wake, that was the first time in my life that I ever balked at the rules of La Cosa Nostra. So we're sitting there, and it seems like an eternity. A couple of guys were playing cards in one of the booths. A few more were watching TV. 2 guys were sitting on stools by the front door, and we had 2 guys outside the bar. Everybody had a pistol on them. Me and Lawrence were sitting at the bar with John Capello, and he started drinking. He knows his night's going to end one of 2 ways. Door number 1, he's going home. Door number 2, I'm putting 2 bullets in the back of his head. There ain't no door number 3. Me and Lawrence were milking our drinks because we had to stay alert in case there was trouble. It was very, very tense. The waiting became very monotonous, and this John Capello just keeps drinking as the hours pass by. All of a sudden, around midnight, the 2 guys by the front door are off of their stools, and they are walking towards the door. The guys playing cards are on their feet. Lawrence starts walking towards the door. I got my gun in John Capello's ribs, and the door opens, and in walks my uncle with Chucky behind him. I take the gun and put it back in my pants, and my uncle walks right over to John Capello and says, "Okay, John, you can go now." And this guy is out the door like Flash Gordon. Chucky tells the guys in his crew to stand outside, and that the only guy allowed in the bar is Blackie Napoli, who should be on his way back from New York with a message from Bobby Manna. Lawrence makes drinks for all of us, and we all toast, "Salud," and my uncle tells us about the meeting. When we got there, it was Pete Casella, his brother Anthony, that backstabbing cocksucker Chicky Narducci, John Grand and his son, and this kid Rocco Marinucci. They checked us for weapons right when we got there. Rocco Marinucci was looking out one of the windows and listening to a police scanner, and the rug in the room where we were meeting was rolled up. I think they were planning on blasting us, but they knew that you guys would have killed John Capello. Chucky says, "If you guys didn't have him here with guns on him, we wouldn't be sitting here talking right now." Lawrence chimed in and said, "Motherfuckers." And my uncle looks at me and says, "You caught Chicky off guard by asking for Pete's brother-in-law as insurance. If they had said no, then there wouldn't have been no meeting. They weren't going to kill us and let him die as a result, so they tried Plan B, which was to try and trick us. These fucking guys think I started doing this yesterday. These cocksuckers, we'll show them." My uncle says, "Pete Casella tells us that someone in New York told him that the Irish had killed Phil Testa and that he wanted me to retaliate." My uncle said Pete Casella was acting as if he was already the boss. My uncle says, "I told him, Pete, that's not what I heard, and I have a meeting set up for tomorrow in New York with Bobby Manna to tell him what I think is going on." Chucky says, "You should have seen their faces when Nicky said he had a meeting tomorrow with New York. The whole room got quiet, and that was the end of the meeting." So we're sitting there waiting on Blackie, and all of a sudden, around 2 a.m., here he comes. My uncle greets him with a hug and a kiss on the cheek when he comes in and says, "Well, how did it go?" Blackie says, "He wants you up there tomorrow for a sit-down," and my uncle tells him, "Me and you are going to go. We're going to have to miss the funeral, but this can't wait." Blackie says, "Okay, Nick, I'll see you tomorrow," and he leaves. This poor guy had driven 2 hours down for the wake, 2 hours up to New York to see Bobby Manna, 2 hours back to deliver the message, and now another 2 hours to get home. But that's how it was in this life. This wasn't a 9-to-5 job. Chucky and his guys walk me, my uncle, and Lawrence to our car just in case the other side decides to take a shot. But they didn't, and we drove back down to Atlantic City. When we get home, it's like 4 in the morning, and my uncle says, "Go upstairs and wake up Dutch. Tell him I need a car around the corner first thing in the morning." Dutch, as I will call him, was a guy that lived in our building and ran errands for us. We let him stay there for free and gave him $200 a week. He did odd jobs for Scarf Inc. and Nat, and he always helped out my mother or grandmother. He was a good guy, and we didn't involve him in anything illegal. So I go bang on his door and tell him what we needed, and he gets right up and gets a car and parks it a few blocks away on Florida Avenue, so my uncle can leave the back way through the alleys early the next morning without being detected. While guys like Chicky Narducci and Pete Casella were playing checkers, Nicky Scarfo and Philip Leonetti were playing chess. Each move was calculated and measured, and in March 1981, Little Nicky and Crazy Phil were one step away from running the entire Philadelphia Atlantic City mob. Scarfo had just turned 52, and in a matter of days, Leonetti would be 28. Scarfo's meeting scheduled the next day with his old pal from Yardville, Bobby Manna, was at this point merely a formality. The morning of the funeral, me and Lawrence get up early, and we're getting ready to go to Philadelphia. My uncle's up, and he's getting ready to head up to New York for his meeting with Blackie Napoli and Bobby Manna. He's going to go through the back alleys and get in the car Dutch had left for him so he doesn't pick up a tail. We were always careful, but going to New York, you had to be extra careful. Guys like Bobby Manna and the Chin did everything top secret. So my uncle says, "Tonight when I get back, we will meet up for dinner. When you guys are up there today, keep your antennas up. I want to know who's saying what and who's gathering with who." As Philip Leonetti and Lawrence Merlino were on their way to Philadelphia for Phil Testa's funeral, Nicky Scarfo was on his way to North Jersey to meet with Blackie Napoli and Bobby Manna in the back room of an Italian restaurant in Hoboken to discuss the future of the Bruno crime family, and more specifically, Little Nicky's future as its boss. 10 years prior, the trio of Scarfo, Napoli, and Manna walked the track together at Yardville State Prison and discussed their future plans as mob leaders. My uncle was very tight with those guys, ever since they were in Yardville together. Scarfo told Manna everything he had learned about Phil Testa's death, the beef with Chicky Narducci, the rumors about the Irish, and his less-than-friendly meeting with Pete Casella the night of the wake. Scarfo told Manna that he believed Casella, Narducci, and others not yet known to him were behind Testa's murder. Manna told Scarfo that whoever had killed Philip Testa did not have the permission of the commission, and as such, the hit was unsanctioned. As it had done with the unsanctioned murder of Testa's predecessor, Angelo Bruno, the commission would launch an immediate investigation to identify those responsible and make arrangements to mete out the appropriate punishment: death. Sitting at the head of the commission was Manna's boss and Scarfo's friend and ally, Vincent the Chin Gigante. Manna told Scarfo that he would schedule a meeting in a week, and that both Scarfo and Casella would present their case to the Genovese hierarchy, which consisted of Gigante, Manna, and Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, the same individuals who presided over the investigation of Angelo Bruno's murder 1 year prior, and who had ordered the gruesome torture killings of those involved. This time around, the Genovese would be without their minister of manipulation, Frank Funzi Thierry, who was on his deathbed in a prison hospital after being convicted of racketeering and sentenced to 10 years in prison. With or without Thierry, the deck was heavily stacked in Scarfo's favor, and Little Nicky knew it. In 1 week, he would likely become the undisputed boss of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob. That night, after his meeting with Blackie and Bobby Manna, me and my uncle went out to dinner at Caesar's. I told him about the funeral, and he told me about the meeting. He said, "For the next week, until I go to New York, we gotta watch our P's and Q's. We're gonna stay close to home. This treachery, it may not be over." For the next week, Scarfo and Leonetti stayed in Atlantic City and kept a low profile, shunning hastily called mob meetings in South Philadelphia and doing their best to avoid their usual haunts. Back when Ange was boss, and him and my uncle started having problems over the unions, we had heard that Ange had sent this big Irish guy from northeast Philly down to Atlantic City, and that this guy may have been looking to kill my uncle. We found out that he had a big tattoo on his arm, and a couple people in the neighborhood described him to us and said they had seen him around Georgia Avenue, and he was asking people questions about us. When my uncle found out about it, he went crazy. He knew someone who knew the guy, and he told them, "You tell that Irish motherfucker if he ever steps foot in Atlantic City again for any reason, I'm going to chop him up and send him back to Philadelphia in 6 trash bags, one for each of his arms, one for each of his legs, one for his torso, and one for that big stupid fucking Irish head of his." We never heard nothing about the guy from that point on. From that point on, everyone who came to Atlantic City checked in with us to let us know why they were in town. This is back when Ange was the boss. My uncle even told Ange, he said, "I'm going to cut your friend's arm off, the one with the tattoo, and I'm going to send it to you." I remember Ange was steaming, but so was my uncle. This was towards the end, before Ange got clipped. Him and my uncle were beefing over the unions. Now, several years later, with Scarfo on the cusp of assuming the throne, Atlantic City was crawling with wise guys, looking to curry favor with little Nicky. It's like overnight every guy and their mother wanted to come to Atlantic City and see my uncle for one reason or another. This is in the days leading up to the meeting in New York. It was me and Lawrence in the office, and we'd see this one and that one, whoever came. My uncle stayed upstairs in his apartment. He didn't come down to see anyone. They were all coming to score points, and we knew it. The day was finally here. It was finally time for the meeting with the Genovese leadership in New York. The meeting was set for 1 p.m., inside Vincent the Chin Gigante's personal headquarters, the Triangle Social Club on Sullivan Street in New York's Greenwich Village. Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo and Peter Pete Casella would sit before Gigante, his consigliere, Bobby Manna, and his front boss, Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, and learn their respective fates as Gigante, the il capo di tutti capi of the commission, dictated the future of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob. Me and my uncle are up early, dressed and ready to go. I'm driving him to New York for his meeting with the Chin. In addition to getting him up there on time, I also had to make sure we didn't pick up any tails. The night before, I told Dutch to take his car and to drive it to the Parkway and get off at the 7N ramp. Me and my uncle were going to drive to the Parkway, and we were going to get off at 7S. The S is for south, and the N is for north. There is a sharp bend where 7S and 7N are running parallel to one another. I told Dutch to pull his car over like he was broken down right at the bend, next to the divider. Me and my uncle come around the bend, and there's Dutch, and his car is parked right where I told him, and it's running. We slow down, and we pull right up to the divider, parallel to his car. Me and my uncle jumped the divider and got in his car, and he jumped the divider and got in our car. The cops who were following us knew we were in the Cadillac, and that we were on the Parkway heading south. So they'd radio ahead, and another car would pick us up with the surveillance. That was how they did it, but we knew their moves. So now after the switch with Dutch, me and my uncle are in his car heading north on the Parkway, and Dutch is in our car heading south on the Parkway. I told him to go all the way to Cape May, which is the end of the Parkway, and turn around and come home. The cops would be following the caddy and have no idea we weren't in it. By the time they figured it out, we'd be in New York. Leonetti's plan worked. In addition to shaking a law enforcement tail, driving in a clean car gave Philip and his uncle an opportunity to talk freely for the nearly 2 hours it would take them to get to Greenwich Village. My uncle knew they were going to make him boss. I said, "You think they're going to do to Pete what they did to Tony?" Meaning kill him. And my uncle shrugged his shoulders and said, "If it was up to me, I'd kill Pete, his brother Anthony, his brother-in-law Johnny Capello, Chicky Narducci, and that fucking Rocco Marinucci. But it ain't up to me. It's up to this guy." And he stroked his chin, which is how we referred to the chin. As Scarfo and Leonetti got closer to New York, both men became more anxious, spotting in the distance the site of the World Trade Center's Twin Towers and the Empire State Building as they prepared to enter the city through the Holland Tunnel. Once we were in the city, my uncle started going over the protocol for the meeting. We were to first go to a restaurant in Little Italy, and then they would send for my uncle. He would go to the meeting, and I would stay at the restaurant. When we got there, we went into the restaurant, and the first guy we saw was Benny Eggs. Venero Benny Eggs Mangano was one of Chin Gigante's closest friends, and was the reputed underboss of the Genovese crime family. Benny Eggs said, "Nick, it's good to see you," and he gave my uncle a kiss on the cheek. My uncle said, "Ben, I want you to meet my nephew, Philip Leonetti. He is a friend of ours." And Benny shook my hand, and gave me a kiss on the cheek and said, "So this is the young man I've heard so much about." He couldn't have been nicer to us. He tells us to have a seat, and right away they start bringing over food and drinks. He says to my uncle, "Let's wait a while for the other guy to get here, and then we'll get you over there," meaning the club where the chin was. As Scarfo, Leonetti, and Mangano made small talk, at 12:45 p.m., sharp, 3 Genovese soldiers walked into the restaurant, and Benny Eggs excused himself from the table. Now the meeting is scheduled for 1 o'clock. Me and my uncle get there at 12 o'clock, and here it's 12:45, and Pete Casella is nowhere to be found. My uncle checks his watch and whispers to me, "I'll bet you this cocksucker ain't gonna show," meaning Pete. I just made a face back at my uncle like, "No way," because that was a major no-no. If you got called to a meeting with the boss of the commission and you didn't go, the penalty was death, no questions asked. So now Benny Eggs comes back and says, "I sent one of those fellows back to see what they want to do, if they want to get started or wait a bit longer for the other guy." My uncle said, "Doesn't matter to me, Ben, whatever you guys want." So 5 minutes later the guy comes back and whispers in Benny Eggs' ear, and he says to me and my uncle, "It may be a little while." Now we're just sitting there eating a little bit, having a couple of drinks, but this isn't the way it was supposed to be. All of a sudden all these thoughts are racing through my mind. Were we getting double-crossed, like Caponegro did? Was I going to wind up in the back of a car like Freddie Salerno? Maybe they were going to take us all out so they could have Atlantic City all to themselves. My uncle's sitting there, and I can see his antenna is up, but we can't talk because Benny Eggs is with us, and he's telling stories and making small talk. But I know my uncle is thinking the same thing. So, next thing you know, it's 3 o'clock. Now, my uncle knows the rules, and so do I. We're not going to say, "Hey, what's taking so long?" or "Is there a problem?" So we're just sitting there. What Scarfo and Leonetti did not know was that while Scarfo had his ace in the hole with Bobby Manna from their days together in Yardville State Prison, Pete Casella had made a similar connection with a powerful Genovese captain when the two men were doing time together on federal drug trafficking charges. At that very moment, the Genovese captain was pleading Casella's case to Gigante, Manna, and Salerno, trying to intervene on his behalf by either swaying the Genovese leaders to name Casella the new boss of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob, or at a minimum, spare his life in the event Gigante was looking to make an example, like he did with Antonio Tony Bananas Caponegro. The whole time we're sitting there, the same guy who is running back and forth between Benny Eggs and the chin keeps coming and going, whispering to Benny each time he does. All of a sudden the door opens and here comes Pete Casella, and he has Rocco Marinucci with him. Benny gets up to greet him, and Pete introduces Rocco as a friend of mine, which means he's not Cosa Nostra, he's not made, and Benny's colors change and he won't shake Rocco's hand. "You can't bring him in here," Benny says to Pete, and one of the Genovese guys barked at Rocco, "Go wait in the car," and Rocco was out the door. He never looked back. It was almost 4 o'clock, and Pete didn't even get a chance to sit down, and the guy who was going back and forth all day reappeared and whispered to Benny, and Benny said, "Okay, gentlemen, they are ready for you." And my uncle and Pete were being escorted towards the door. Benny said, "Nick, I'm going to stay here with your nephew and teach him how to play cards." And we all laughed. Everyone except for Pete. Pete looked like he was scared to death. As Philip Leonetti and Benny Eggs Mangano played cards, Nicodemo Scarfo and Pete Casella were taken to the Triangle Social Club, which was only 3 blocks away. The windows on the nondescript storefront were completely blacked out, and inside there were 2 chairs, one for Scarfo and one for Casella. Sitting across from the 2 Philadelphia mobsters behind a table were the 3 Genovese leaders. Gigante was seated in the middle in his trademark bathrobe. The stone-faced Manna was to his left, and the dour-looking Salerno to his right, wearing his trademark fedora and puffing on a cigar that remained firmly between his teeth. According to Scarfo, who later told Leonetti what happened inside the meeting, Gigante wasted no time with pleasantries and started the meeting by speaking directly to Casella in his rapid-fire New York cadence. "Listen, we know what happened. Don't lie to us. If you lie to us, we can't help you. Tell us the names of everyone who was involved in this plot." Scarfo told Leonetti that Casella answered the question directly. "It was me. It was my idea. Me, Chicky Narducci, and Rocco Marinucci, and a kid Rocco knows." Scarfo said Fat Tony took the cigar out of his mouth and barked, "This motherless fuck, the kid. Does he have a name?" And Casella responded, "I don't know his name," and then hung his head in shame. Gigante smacked the table, and Casella looked up at him, and then the Don spoke. "You're finished. You are to retire immediately to Florida. You are forbidden from ever returning to Philadelphia. When you leave here, you get on a plane and you go. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, we will kill you, your brother, and your brother-in-law. Do you understand?" Casella nodded his head, and Gigante gestured for one of the Genovese soldiers to escort him out of the club. As Casella attempted to shake Gigante's hand, Gigante stared at him with disgust and spit on the floor in his direction, and Casella was whisked away. With Casella gone, it was just little Nicky and the 3 Genovese leaders. Again, Gigante got right to the point. "Well, Nick, I don't see no one else here, so I guess that makes you the new boss." At which point Gigante stood, and Scarfo approached the table and kissed Gigante on each cheek, as Manna and Salerno clapped their hands. Scarfo would also kiss Manna and Salerno in a similar fashion. Nicodemo Domenico Scarfo was now the undisputed boss of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob. He had just turned 52 years old and was strategically aligned with New York's Genovese crime family and Vincent the Chin Gigante, the most powerful mob boss in the nationwide crime syndicate known as La Cosa Nostra, this thing of ours. The underworld in Philadelphia and Atlantic City would never be the same. That night, when Scarfo and Leonetti returned to Georgia Avenue, there was a small contingency waiting for them. It was Chucky, Lawrence, Salvi, and Frank Monty. I introduced my uncle to them as their new boss, and everyone was hugging each other and kissing each other on the cheek. The 5 of us went down to Angeloni's for drinks to celebrate. My uncle told us, "We gotta let things settle a bit before we start making changes. We gotta do it right. One step at a time. This is a whole new ball game." Everyone was happy, but it seemed like Salvi was a little out of it. I think he was expecting my uncle to say our first order of business is we're going to go kill this one or we're going to go kill that one, the guys who had killed his father. But my uncle was saying we're going to take things slow and let the smoke clear, which was definitely the right move for the organization. Nicky Scarfo enjoyed a steady stream of visitors to his Atlantic City headquarters over the next few weeks, as members and associates of the Bruno crime family came to pledge their allegiance to the new boss. Scarfo would also travel to Philadelphia and meet with the captains left over from the Bruno and Testa regimes to discuss the family's new hierarchy. Nicky Scarfo would name his close friend Salvatore Chucky Merlino as his underboss and Testa loyalist Frank Monty to the post of consigliere. Within a few short months, Scarfo would name 4 new caporegimes: Joseph Chicky Ciancalini, Salvatore Salvi Testa, Lawrence Yogi Merlino, and his 28-year-old nephew, Philip Crazy Phil Leonetti. Scarfo kept his old captain, Alfred Freddie Iezzi, on board, but the old-timer was already semi-retired. Scarfo also kept Bruno-era captains, Big Santo Idone and Joseph Joe Scafidi in place, but took down Johnny Capello, the brother-in-law of the recently deposed Pete Casella. Scarfo also kept the treacherous Frank Chicky Narducci in place for the time being, but little Nicky had already decided that Narducci's days were numbered for his involvement in the bombing death of Philip Testa. Me, Chucky, and Lawrence were the only ones who knew what Pete Casella had told the Chin about the plot to kill Phil Testa. My uncle was afraid if Salvi knew, or even Frank Monti, that they would kill Chicky Narducci immediately. My uncle said, "We're going to kill him. We're just not going to kill him yet." As March turned into April, little Nicky and his new regime were in full swing, and business was good, and it was about to get a whole lot better. One day, me and my uncle are having lunch with Saul, Kane, and Lawrence, and Saul says, "Nick, I got an idea for you. You should start a street tax. The way it works is, you tax everybody who is doing anything illegal, and you offer them the protection and support of your family in exchange for them paying the tax. I know it's been done in Chicago and real big in New York in the 30s and 40s. I think you could make a lot of money doing it." My uncle's eyes lit up. He knew that we had the muscle to enforce it. He made a face at me, and I made a face back at him, and we both smiled. From that moment on, the imposition and collection of the street tax became our #1 priority and one of our biggest moneymakers. As Scarfo was setting out to restructure the organization, each made member had to formally come in and sit down with the boss and the underboss and talk about what they had going on. Guys had to come in and report what they had going on, who was doing what, so that we could figure out what was out there and what we were going to collect, both as tribute and as the street tax. A lot of guys hadn't been paying Ange or Phil Testa the right amount in tribute for years, and some guys weren't paying at all. My uncle told everybody that came in the same thing. Those days are over. You and your people are going to pay what you're supposed to pay, or it's this. And he made the sign of the gun. Scarfo had assembled a group of killers around him, and everyone knew it. Despite that, there were those in the underworld who did not heed the new boss's warning. A man like Chelsea's Stevie Burris, the leader of Philadelphia's Greek mob. Burris had blatantly balked at Scarfo's demand that he be forced to pay the mob's new street tax, and Scarfo swiftly ordered his murder to send a message to anyone else considering not paying. My uncle had Long John set it up because he was close to Burris. Raymond Long John Morterano, the one-time aide-de-camp to Angelo Bruno, who had helped Scarfo murder union boss John McCullough in December 1980, set up a dinner party at a restaurant in Philadelphia and invited Burris to join him and his wife and several other people for a night out. Burris brought his young girlfriend to the restaurant, and everyone was having a good time, until 2 men with ski masks entered the restaurant and motioned for Martirano and the others to move as they opened fire on Burris, killing him with a barrage of bullets, and killing his young date, who got caught in the crossfire. The cold-blooded mob killing of Stevie Burris sent the rest of the Philadelphia underworld scurrying to pay Scarfo's street tax, and Scarfo's crews were bringing in money, hand over fist. Once we got it going good, we were bringing in $100,000 per month, just in street tax money. Don't forget, we still had gambling, loan sharking, and extortion operations, so on a good month, we could bring in $500,000 or more in cash. With Scarfo and Leonetti based in Atlantic City, Salvatore Chucky Merlino and Salvi Testa were running the day-to-day operations of the family in South Philadelphia. Things were great in the beginning, especially after we killed Stevie Burris. Everyone was doing their job, and we were making a lot of money. Everybody was paying. My uncle was happy, and things were good. But hanging over Scarfo's head in the summer of 1981 was an imminent prison sentence stemming from his conviction on gun possession charges in connection with the .22 that was found in his bedroom drawer during the police raid following the Falcone killing. As a convicted felon, Scarfo was facing several years in federal prison and was out on bail pending appeal. His lawyer, Bobby Simone, had told him that the appeal was a long shot, and that in all likelihood he would be in jail within the next 12 months. The looming jail sentence did not stop Scarfo from ordering the murder of a South Philadelphia drug dealer and loan shark named Johnny Calabrese on October 6, 1981, because, like Stevie Burris, Johnny Calabrese balked at paying the Scarfo mob's street tax. We approached Chicky Ciancalini, who was close with Calabrese, and he set it up. 2 guys from his crew, Tommy Del Giorno and Fafi Yanarella, were the shooters, and another guy named Pat Spirito was the getaway driver. As Chick was walking Calabrese to his car, Tommy and Fafi came out of an alley and blasted him. He died in the street. The Calabrese hit was the latest in a string of gangland murders that started with the Bruno killing less than 18 months before, and garnered both a lot of publicity from the local media and a lot of extra scrutiny from law enforcement. 3 weeks after the Calabrese killing, little Nicky turned his attention on an aging mob associate named Frankie Flowers D'Alfonso. Frankie Flowers wasn't a made guy. He was an associate, and he made a ton of money with Ange. They were involved in a lot of things together, both illegal and legal stuff. So when my uncle becomes boss, he sends for Flowers, and the guy doesn't come in. So my uncle tells Salvi, "I want you to give him a beating. Don't kill him, but shake him up. Make sure he knows that it's a new regime, and he is going to pay like everyone else." Scarfo knew that D'Alfonso was a huge earner, and Scarfo hoped that a beating at the hands of Salvi Testa would bring the old-timer around. Salvi and Gino Milano, who was one of Salvi's guys, set up a meeting with Flowers, and he falls for it, and is walking to the meeting, which was going to take place on the street in the 9th Street Italian Market in South Philadelphia. As he's walking, Salvi and Gino jump out from behind a car. Salvi has a baseball bat, and Gino has a steel bar, and they give Flowers a beating. They tuned him up pretty good. When an ambulance crew found D'Alfonso, he was semi-conscious and bleeding in the street. At the hospital, it was determined that his skull had been fractured, his jaw had been broken, several bones in his face were broken, and one of his kneecaps had been shattered. D'Alfonso would spend the next month in a South Philadelphia hospital recuperating. By the time he was out, it was almost Christmas, and Philadelphia's new mob don, Nicky Scarfo, decided to throw himself a party. There was a place on South Street called La Cucina that we used to go to. Sam the barber, who was with us, owned it. We rented the place out and threw a big party. Everyone in the family was there. You should have seen the spread. Shrimp, lobster, champagne, the best of everything. It was a great party. Everyone who came brought my uncle an envelope for Christmas. Some envelopes had a couple hundred in them, some had a couple thousand. By the end of the night, I think my uncle had made almost $100,000 just from the envelopes. Some guys would put a Christmas card in the envelope with a nice message for my uncle. He'd laugh as he was taking the cash out. He didn't give a fuck about the card or what they wrote. It was a shakedown. We weren't there to sing Christmas carols. Towards the end of the night, I'm sitting at a table with my uncle and Chucky, and my uncle motions for Salvi to come over. My uncle says to Salvi, "I think it's time." And Salvi says, "Time for what, Nick?" And my uncle says, "Your father." And Salvi's eyes get real big. My uncle says, "It's 2 guys." And he nods towards Chicky Narducci, who was standing a few feet away from us talking to some guys at the bar. "That's one of them. And the other one is the young kid with the pizza shop, Pete's friend." Salvi nods his head, and he's staring straight ahead in Chicky Narducci's direction, almost like he's in a trance. My uncle says, "You handle it how you see fit. I want you to do this for your father and for this family." Salvi's sitting there, and his eyes had welled up with tears, and he leans in and hugs my uncle and gives him a kiss on the cheek. He wiped his eyes and said, "Thank you, Nick." And he got up and boom, he's out the door. I think his emotions had gotten the best of him. Now, when my uncle became boss, he didn't come back to Philadelphia and tell everyone what Pete Casella had said at the meeting with the Chin about who was in on the Phil Testa murder. The word going around was that New York had given Pete Casella a pass, and that they had retired him to Florida and made my uncle the boss. That was it. That was the story. No one knew that Pete had given up Chicky and Rocco Marinucci, except for my uncle, and the only people he told were me, Chucky, and Lawrence. We knew, but no one else in the family knew. Now we're at the Christmas party, and my uncle tells Salvi, and he gives him the okay to kill both guys. It was a great way to end the year. Frank Chicky Narducci was in a bad spot. While it appeared that the multi-millionaire mob capo had survived the bloodletting in the aftermath of the Bruno and Testa killings, Narducci faced an adversary with greater might than little Nicky Scarfo, Rico. Narducci was one of several defendants named in a 1980 racketeering indictment brought by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Philadelphia, aimed at dismantling the Bruno crime family. The racketeering-influenced corrupt organization, RICO statute, had become the federal government's most reliable weapon in the war against organized crime. Within the scope of a RICO prosecution, the government first had to prove that the defendants were members of an organization and that the organization had engaged in illegal activities. The government then had to show that each defendant had participated in at least 2 predicate crimes on behalf of the organization. Predicate crimes covered under the broad RICO statute included facilitating illegal gambling operations, loaning money at usurious rates, the trafficking of narcotics, extortion, and acts of violence, including murder. In theory, a low-level mob bookmaker, who was also a loan shark, could find himself facing more serious charges if other members of the organization had committed a murder on behalf of the organization. The RICO indictment that charged Narducci originally included Angelo Bruno and Philip Testa, but both men had died before the case was brought to court. Jury selection began on January 4, 1982, inside the federal courthouse, located on Market Street, a few blocks away from Philadelphia's Old City neighborhood, which is one of the most historic areas in the United States. Home to the Liberty Bell and the world-famous Betsy Ross House, Old City is where the Declaration of Independence was first read, and the Constitution of the United States was written. In all likelihood, none of this was on Chicky Narducci's mind as he and several co-defendants left the courthouse after an exhausting 4th day of jury selection. The kind of justice that Narducci was to face was not what our nation's forefathers had in mind. That evening, as Narducci parked his late-model Cadillac half a block away from his South Philadelphia home and exited the car, he heard someone say, "Hey, Frank!" and he turned around to see who was calling. It was the Grim Reaper. To Narducci's shock and horror, he was staring at Salvi Testa with a gun in his hand. The mob's longtime gambling czar's luck was about to run out. Testa pumped the first several shots into Narducci's face from point-blank range, and Narducci's body crumbled into the street below him. Testa and another gunman, his best friend and right-hand man, Joseph Joe Pungatore, would then empty their guns into Narducci's fallen body as he lay bleeding and helpless, wedged between his car and the curb, stuck in the gutter. When it was over, Narducci was dead, having been shot 10 times in the face, head, neck, and chest. Salvi was on cloud 9 after he killed Narducci. That's how much he hated him for what he had done to his father. He would brag about it and say, "I made sure he knew it was me, and I gave him a second so he knew what was coming. You should have seen the look on his face when he knew I had him." The revenge killing of Chicky Narducci could be justified by Narducci's involvement in the bombing death of Philip Testa. But Scarfo's next killing seemed to be rooted in only pure evil and vindictiveness. My uncle hated this guy from South Philly named Mickey Diamond. Hated him with a passion. This went back 15, 20 years. Mickey Diamond was close with Joseph, Joe the Boss Runeta, who was Ange's consigliere before Caponegro, and Joe the Boss hated my uncle because my uncle once made a disparaging remark about his daughter. My uncle said she was ugly, and Joe the Boss went nuts and wanted Ange to have my uncle killed, but Ange said no. This was in the late 60s, for Christ's sake, but ever since then my uncle hated both Joe the Boss and Mickey Diamond. Now, adding to this, around the same time frame, Chucky Merlino had gotten into trouble with two old-time mob guys. Mickey Diamond had ratted Chucky out to the old-timers, and they demanded a sit-down with Ange over what happened with Chucky, and because Joe the Boss was the consigliere, it was his job to mediate the dispute. Now, at the time, Chucky wasn't a made guy, but my uncle was, and my uncle and Chucky were best friends. So my uncle goes to the sit-down and represents Chucky. He goes to bat for him. This Joe the Boss hated my uncle so much, his recommendation to Ange was that Chucky should be killed. He wanted to kill Chucky because Ange wouldn't let him kill my uncle. My uncle challenged him at the sit-down, and this made Joe the Boss hate my uncle even more. These old-timers were all about respect. So Ange tells Joe the Boss, he says, "We're not killing the kid, not for this," meaning Chucky, and Chucky apologizes to the old-timers, and the whole thing is forgotten. But the venom between my uncle and Joe the Boss continued until he died. I think he died in 1977. When Joe the Boss died, that's when Caponegro became the consigliere, and Mickey Diamond kind of went with Caponegro. Once Caponegro got killed, Mickey Diamond was basically out of it. He wasn't really in play. So maybe a week or so after we killed Chicky Narducci, my uncle and I head to the Brajole Cafe for a meeting. I thought it was going to be just us and Chucky, but when we get there, it's Chucky and Frank Monty. A few minutes later, in comes the old-timers who had the beef with Chucky all those years before. Now, all these years later, Chucky is the underboss, and these guys are semi-retired. I'm thinking to myself, why is my uncle meeting with these two guys? My uncle says to them, "Fellas, I need your help with something." Now, if I don't know why they're there, I know that they have absolutely no idea why they're there. So they say, "Sure, Nick, what do you need?" And my uncle says, "It's about your friend Mickey Diamond." And he makes the sign of the gun and points it to the floor. "He's got to go." You should have seen the look on their faces. They looked like they were going to cry. Chucky even made a face at me like he couldn't believe my uncle wanted to kill Mickey Diamond after all these years, and he was going to make these two guys do it. Now, these guys know the rules. They know if they don't kill Mickey Diamond, my uncle's going to kill them. But that was how my uncle was. He never forgot nothing, and he never forgave no one. On February 25, 1982, Philadelphia police found the body of Dominic "Mickey Diamond" DeVito in the trunk of his car, parked in a residential neighborhood in South Philadelphia. DeVito had been shot in the head with a .38, and his body had been placed in plastic trash bags. His hands and feet had been tied behind him. The DeVito killing was the 16th Philly mob killing in 6 years, and number 17 was less than 3 weeks away. Around this time, there was a message on a local TV channel in Atlantic City that played over and over for almost 3 days that said, "Nicky and Phil, you're next." It was handwritten on a piece of paper and was mixed in with some local advertisements. When we saw it, my uncle said, "What the fuck is this?" I later found out that an Atlantic City cop who lived to break balls was the one who wrote it, and him and his friend, another cop who loved to break balls, put it in the projector inside of Convention Hall as a joke. There was nothing funny about what would happen next. Salvi Testa had started 1982 off by killing Chicky Narducci, one of the men responsible for the bombing death of his father on March 15, 1981. The other killer, Rocco Marinucci, thought that Scarfo and Testa were unaware of his involvement in the Philip Testa murder. That's because guys in Salvi Testa's crew had been referring burglary jobs to Marinucci, who, in addition to making pizzas and nail bombs, was also a renowned burglar. Right after Salvi killed Chicky Narducci, he went and grabbed Chicky's two sons, Frankie and Philip, and brought them in. He told them, "I killed your father because he killed my father." Now, Frankie and Philip were around La Cosa Nostra all of their life through their father, so they knew the rules. Frankie was a made guy, and he was part of Salvi's crew. Now, when Salvi tells them this, they knew there is nothing they can say or do about it. If they tried to retaliate or anything like that, we would have killed them both, and they knew it. So they accepted it for what it was, and everyone moved on. Now, at the time, Frankie Narducci was tight with this Rocco Marinucci, the kid who made the bomb. So Salvi's crew, which included both Narducci brothers, are feeding this Rocco little jobs, and Rocco and Salvi's guys are making money together, and Rocco thinks he's in the clear. But this is the trap. It's just like we did with the concrete union job for Vincent Falcone, and just like Vince, Rocco falls for it. Salvi's guys tell Rocco, "We need you to help us open a safe. We think there's a couple million in there." So Rocco and Salvi's guys go to the Buckeye Club in South Philadelphia, which is Frankie Narducci's place, to go over the plan to get the safe and get the tools they needed. Rocco is thinking, this is it. This is the score of a lifetime. Now, this whole time, Rocco is dealing with guys in Salvi's crew, but never Salvi himself. So they get to the club, they go inside, and the lights are out. Frankie says, "Must be a bad bulb." The other guys come in, and Rocco is asking them if they brought flashlights so they can see, because the place is pitch black. Frankie says to Rocco, "There's some flashlights in the back room, and there's a light switch back there. See if that's working." Rocco finds a string hanging from the ceiling, and he pulls it, and a dim light goes on. And as Rocco turns around, instead of seeing the flashlights, he sees Salvi Testa. The Grim Reaper would strike again. Testa and his crew, who were known in law enforcement circles as the Young Executioners, lived up to their name by tying up Marinucci and brutally torturing him for several hours before putting him out of his misery. But things didn't go quite as Salvi had planned. Salvi told me afterwards that he bought a bag of M80s and cherry bombs, like the firecrackers you see on the 4th of July. He wanted to torture this kid within an inch of his life, and then, when he was ready to kill him, he wanted to put the fireworks in his mouth and keep setting them off until he died. But the problem was the saliva in his mouth made it difficult to light the firecrackers, so they kept beating him and beating him every time they wouldn't light. So finally Salvi pulls out a gun and empties it into this kid's head. Then they stuffed 3 of the firecrackers into his mouth to send a message that the killing was payback for what happened to Salvi's dad. The firecrackers weren't the only message that Salvi Testa and his Young Executioners crew would send. They purposely committed the murder on March 15, 1982, the 1-year anniversary of Philip Testa's death. In less than a year, Nicodemo, Little Nicky Scarfo, had established his burgeoning organization as the most ruthless regime in the history of the Philadelphia mob. Gone were the docile Don days of Angelo Bruno. Nicky Scarfo was a gangster, and the men around him were stone-cold killers. This is exactly what my uncle wanted. He wanted people to be afraid of us, and they were. Everyone was scared to death. And for good reason. Scarfo and Leonetti had turned Atlantic City into the Wild West of the 1970s, with several high-profile gangland killings, and now they were doing the same in the streets of South Philadelphia. As far as appearances go, Harry the Hunchback Ricobene could not have been less intimidating. Barely 5 feet tall, with a squeaky voice, a long, bushy white beard, and as you might expect from his nickname, walking with a slump due to a curvature of the spine he had had since birth, Ricobene didn't look like much to contend with. He was. Born in Sicily on July 27, 1909, Harry Ricobene came to the United States with his family as a young boy, settling in South Philadelphia and quickly gravitating to a life of crime. Law enforcement records indicate he was inducted into the mob by Prohibition-era Don Salvatore Sabella when he was only 17 years old. Benefiting from the early experience of plying his trade in the underworld, he became an expert and well-respected racketeer by the time he reached his 30s, making money from a variety of illicit endeavors and keeping himself continually in the good graces of whoever was running the show in the Philly mob by always giving them a little taste of his action. That was until Nicky Scarfo took over. Scarfo wasn't satisfied with prior arrangements. He wanted more than a little taste of the hunchback's vast riches. When he became boss in the spring of 1981, little Nicky made it known to Ricobene, a one-time underworld ally, that he expected a non-negotiable set percentage of his monthly cash intake to be collected as part of Scarfo's aggressive underworld street tax. Despite the killings of John Calabrese and Stevie Burris, and the violent beating of Frankie Flowers d'Alfonso, all of whom had balked at paying Scarfo's street tax, Ricobene, the seasoned old-school mob vet, scoffed at Scarfo's demand. Over the years, Ricobene had built up a strong power base. He surrounded himself with a loyal and well-stocked crew of thugs, thieves, and fellow racketeers who answered to him and to him only. He, in essence, oversaw a family within a family. This fact made him believe he could challenge Scarfo in a street war, and that's exactly what he did. We started having problems with the Ricobenes in 1982. Harry refused to pay the street tax, and he was thumbing his nose at my uncle. This drove my uncle crazy. He used to say, "This guy thinks he's going to make a jerk-off out of me? We'll see about that." We tried everything to bring him in and get him on board, but Harry was a stubborn old-time ciggy, and he made it clear that he didn't acknowledge my uncle as his boss, and he wasn't going to pay us. He left us no choice. We had to kill him. Scarfo decided to send his consigliere, Frank Monte, and the treacherous Raymond Long John Martirano to see Harry's younger brother, Mario Sonny Ricobene, with an order from Scarfo that Sonny help in setting up his brother to be killed. The move backfired. Instead of joining the assault against his brother, Sonny Ricobene went to his brother and warned him of the pending plot to kill him and who was involved. The hunchback's response was loud and left little doubt that he was more than willing to go toe-to-toe with little Nicky. A few weeks later, on May 13th, Frank Monte was gunned down while standing in front of his car at a South Philadelphia gas station by Joseph Padula and Victor DeLuca, two hitmen in Ricobene's crew who had been lying in wait for the mob consigliere in a parking lot across the street from the gas station with a powerful scope-fitted rifle. The Ricobenes had struck first. Nicky Scarfo was incensed. The war was on. As if a street war with Harry Ricobene in South Philadelphia wasn't enough, Nicky Scarfo and Philip Leonetti soon became saddled with a new problem from an old foe in Atlantic City. Now, right around the time we started beefing with Harry, Frank Gerace gets word to us through Bobby Lumio that he needs to see me and my uncle. Frank Gerace was a bartender who we knew, and we made him the president of Local 54, which was the biggest union in Atlantic City, representing the hotel and restaurant workers in the casinos. At the time, they had like 15,000 people in the union, and they were strong, but we made them even stronger. Bobby Lumio was a made guy who my uncle put in a powerful position at Local 54. He was the secretary-treasurer and was on the executive board. He also lived in one of our apartments on Georgia Avenue. At the time, Bobby was dying. He had real bad cancer, and the doctors had only given him a few months to live. Bobby tells me one day, "You gotta get with Percy," meaning Frank Gerace. "He has a problem with Joe Salerno." I say to Bobby, "Joe Salerno the plumber? They got him in the witness protection program. How's he making trouble for Frank Gerace?" I'm thinking maybe his medicines got him loopy, because Joe Salerno isn't around anymore. And I don't think he planned on coming back because he knew we would have killed him. So Bobby's lying there in the bed, and he says, "You gotta get with Percy." So the next day I send for Frank Gerace, and I have him meet me down in Margate near a place that I had on Adams Avenue. When he gets there, I tell him what Bobby had told me, and he says, "It's true, Philip. Joe Salerno is going to testify against me at a hearing with the state. They are trying to get me out of Local 54 because they are saying I am with you and your uncle, and Joe Salerno is their main witness." I told Frank I would talk to my uncle, and we would figure things out. Now, this is bad. We made a lot of money from Local 54. We were getting $50, $60, sometimes $100,000 a month, all of it in cash. If Frank Gerace got bumped out, it was going to be a problem for our family. I knew my uncle was going to go nuts when he found out. Winning the Falcone murder trial wasn't enough for him. He wanted to kill Joe Salerno for testifying against us, but we couldn't get to him because he was in the witness protection program. Every time we were around the Narducci brothers, Frank and Philip, my uncle used to ask them, "You guys seen Salerno around?" Because Joe Salerno's family lived right near where the Narduccis lived. When Frank or Philip would say no, my uncle would go into a tirade about Joe Salerno, calling him a no-good rat motherfucker or calling him a cock-sucking rat, and he would tell them, "If that motherless fuck ever shows his face, it's this," and he'd make the sign of the gun. "I don't care who he's with. He could be with the Pope, and it's this," and make the sign of the gun. So the next morning, when I pick up my uncle, I tell him about my conversation with Bobby Lumio and Frank Gerace. He went berserk about Joe Salerno. He said, "This motherfucker wants to keep trying to hurt us. We're gonna hurt him. We're gonna see how he likes it, this no-good rat motherfucker." He was irate. 1, because he was going to testify against us again, and 2, because this time it could cost us a lot of money. He said, "Today when we go see Bobby, I want him to get to the bottom of this." We were on our way to Philadelphia to see Bobby Simone, who was representing my uncle on his appeal of the federal gun charge. The whole ride up, we're not talking, because we never talked in the car, or even near the car, but every 10 minutes or so my uncle would say, "This motherfucker," or mutter something to himself about Joe Salerno. I'm riding next to him, and he's talking to himself like a crazy person. So we get to Bobby's office, and he tells my uncle that if he doesn't win the appeal on the gun case, that he was looking at 2 years in prison, and he'd have to do about 18 months. It was almost like my uncle didn't hear a word Bobby said. He said, "Look, Bob, I'm not worried about the gun case. If I have to do the 2 years, I'll do the 2 years. I need you to look into this thing for me." And he told him all about the thing with Joe Salerno and Frank Gerace. Bobby said, "Okay, Nick." And he started talking about the gun case again, and my uncle waved him off and said, "Bob, we need to focus on this thing with Joe Salerno. We can worry about the gun case later." Bobby told us to give him a few days to see what was going on. During this time, Bobby Lumio was in a real bad shape. He was on his deathbed. One of the last things he said was, "Tell my friend I will miss him." He was talking about my uncle. This was on his deathbed. So after Bobby dies, my uncle hears what he had said, and my uncle said, "I don't give a fuck about him. Nobody's gonna miss him." This was a guy who was with us, a made guy, who while he was dying was looking out for us by tipping us off about the thing with Joe Salerno and Frank Gerace. But now that Bobby was dead, he couldn't do anything for my uncle. That's how he thought. That's how evil of a guy he was. So about a week later, Bobby Simone comes down to see us, and we walk up to the boardwalk, and he tells us that Joe Salerno is scheduled to testify before the state, and that if things go bad, Frank Gerace is going to be removed as the president of Local 54, and that there could be an indictment for labor racketeering charges. My uncle looks at me and shakes his head and says, "These fucking rats. We gotta do something here. We can't just sit back and watch. We gotta take action." I didn't know what to say. What could I say? Joe Salerno was in the witness protection program. It's not like he was in Atlantic City or South Philadelphia, and we could kill him. We had no idea where he was. A week later, under the protection of the United States Marshal Service, Joe Salerno would testify before the New Jersey State Casino Control Commission about Local 54 and its connections to Nicky Scarfo, Philip Leonetti, and the mob. His testimony touched on his relationship with Scarfo, Leonetti, the Merlino brothers, and mob killer Nicholas "Nick the Blade" Virgilio in the late 1970s, and each of their relationships with the Union, and then went on to detail once again the night that Philip Leonetti murdered Vincent Falcone. As Salerno testified, he wore a dark hood over his head with holes cut out around his eyes, so that his identity could remain a secret. There were more than a dozen armed U.S. Marshals in and around the building where Salerno was testifying, which was located at the corner of Tennessee and the Boardwalk in Atlantic City, less than 2 miles from Scarfo's Georgia Avenue headquarters. Salerno's testimony included a story about an incident in which Nicky Scarfo lost his temper at Bobby Lumio, a high-ranking official of Local 54, after Lumio made a joke that Scarfo didn't find funny. According to Salerno's testimony, Scarfo said to Lumio, "Let me tell you something. I got you your job, and I got that other big fat jerk-off downstairs his job, and don't you ever fucking forget it." Based in large part on the testimony of Joe Salerno, Frank Geraci was disqualified from having any further association with Local 54, as were several of his top associates, which meant that Nicky Scarfo and Philip Leonetti no longer controlled the Union through Geraci. So, after we get the news that Frank Geraci is out, my uncle is furious. He was so full of venom against Joe Salerno. He said, "Do you believe this motherfucker? Can you believe what he did to us? We can't let this stand." He was enraged. Nicky Scarfo was a volatile, homicidal maniac on a good day, but the climate around him in the summer months of 1982 made him an untamed beast whose penchant for blood and violence had reached an all-time high. As if the murder of his trusted aide Frank Monti and the war with Harry Ricobene weren't enough, Scarfo had just lost control of the biggest union in Atlantic City and the riches that came with it, which amounted to almost $1 million per year in tax-free cash, and the unbridled power that came from controlling a union with thousands of members. Add to that the 2-year federal prison sentence that was hanging over his head on the 1979 weapon charge, and little Nicky wasn't exactly in what you'd call a good place. Plus, his allergies were bothering him. My uncle's allergies were real bad, and when they were bothering him, forget about it. He was the most miserable human being on the planet. Everybody would stay away. That's how bad he was. Now, around this time, we had our hands full, and my uncle was unbearable, the worst I'd ever seen him. One day my uncle says to me, "Let's take a walk." And we start walking up Georgia Avenue towards the Boardwalk. We were going to meet Salvi and Philip Narducci in front of Convention Hall. As we are walking, my uncle starts telling me a story about the Blade getting drunk in the casino and starting a fight and causing this big scene. I figure he's going to tell me to go to the casino and straighten it out. He says, "This fucking guy is an embarrassment, the way he conducts himself with the drinking and all this nonsense. I've had it up to here with him, and I am done with his shenanigans. I want you to take him for a walk down the alleys behind the house, and I want you to kill him right there in the alley. Leave him in the gutter where he belongs with all his drinking." I'm thinking to myself, Jesus Christ, with everything we got going on, now we're going to start killing our own guys? What are we doing? After flippantly ordering the murder of Nicholas "Nick the Blade" Virgilio, one of his oldest friends, Nicky Scarfo was about to cross an even more sinister line with his next murder plot. So now we're on the Boardwalk, and Salvi and Philip were there waiting for us. Like clockwork, my uncle says to Philip, "You seen that cocksucker Joe Salerno around?" And Philip says, "Not the kid, but I see his old man all the time. He owns a motel down in Wildwood." It was almost like I could see the light bulb go off in my uncle's head. I could read him like a book. I knew what was coming next. Without hesitation, my uncle says to Philip, "I want you to go see the old man, and when you do, it's this." And he makes the sign of the gun. We're going to teach these animals a lesson." Philip says, "Okay, Nick," and Salvi shoots me a look like, "What the fuck is this?" This was against the rules, and what we were supposed to stand for. Joe Salerno's father was a civilian. He wasn't involved with us or this thing, and now we're going to kill him because of something his son did. I knew this was a big, big mistake, but with my uncle, there was no questioning him. My uncle then turned to Salvi and said, "Everybody connected to our friend, the dwarf," meaning Harry Ricobene, "it's this." And he makes the sign of the gun. "All of them, his whole regime. You're in charge. Get it done." In a span of about 15 minutes, Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo had ordered the murders of Nicholas Nick the Blade Virgilio, Joe Salerno Sr., Harry the Hunchback Ricobene, and everyone connected to Ricobene's crew. My head was spinning. It was like he wanted to kill everyone and everything around him. It was a never-ending cycle with him. Wasting no time carrying out Scarfo's orders, Salvi Testa drafted a list of everyone connected to the Ricobene faction and ordered that they be killed on sight. Within days, Salvatore Wayne Grand, an ambitious Scarfo assassin and trusted member of Salvi Testa's young executioner's crew, caught the hunchback all by himself in a South Philadelphia street corner, standing in a phone booth. The hunchback was a sitting duck. Wayne Grand ambushed Ricobene, blasting him with 5 shots from a revolver at close range, but miraculously, the 73-year-old hunchback was able to wrestle the gun away from the 28-year-old Grand before he could finish the job. When Philadelphia police arrived moments later, they found Ricobene leaning against the phone booth, bleeding, and holding his assassin's gun. When he was asked how he was able to wrestle the gun from his would-be killer, the hunchback responded, "He was done with it, so I took it." Ricobene would later tell associates he knew that the weapon was a 6-shot revolver and had counted the 5 shots that had hit him. Knowing that there was 1 bullet left, Ricobene stated he took the gun and attempted to shoot his assailant with the 6th bullet, but the gun was empty. So far, Harry the Hunchback was winning the war, and he was about to return fire with a strike of his own. While Scarfo's gunmen were out looking to kill everyone who was part of the Ricobene faction, the Ricobenes were out looking to kill the men aligned with Scarfo. In late July, Joseph Padula and fellow Ricobene loyalist Victor De Luca found Salvi Testa eating clams while sitting on a wooden crate in the middle of the famous 9th Street Italian market, and hit him with multiple shotgun blasts fired from their passing car. The hit team of Padula and De Luca had previously killed Scarfo's consigliere, Frank Monti, and now had wounded his street boss. The spry and vibrant Testa had half of his left shoulder blown off, but like the hunchback, he survived the attack, and after some time in the hospital, he was back on the street leading Little Nicky's assault on Ricobene and his renegades. Shortly after the shooting of Salvi Testa in the Italian market, Joey Grand, a Scarfo hitman and the brother of Wayne Grand, fired multiple shots at Ricobene as he sat behind the wheel of his Mercedes on a South Philadelphia street corner. However, once again, the old man survived, failing to take a single bullet. Things were at a standstill. Tensions were increasing, and the local press was having a field day as the streets of Philadelphia were engulfed in an all-out mob war. But killing Harry Ricobene wasn't the only thing on Nicky Scarfo's mind. A few weeks later, on August 9th, 1982, Joseph Salerno Sr. was in the office of the motel he owned in Wildwood Crest, which was a short distance from the beach and the famous Wildwood Boardwalk, which was one of the most popular destinations at the Jersey Shore. The no vacancy sign was lit, yet a young man was pacing outside the office door wearing a jogging suit and a hooded sweatshirt. He was 19-year-old Philip Narducci, the son of the late Frank Chicky Narducci. When Joe Salerno Sr. opened the door, Narducci took a handgun out of his pocket and fired 2 shots at him, one of which struck him in the neck. Salerno Sr. was not only alive, but he was able to talk to the paramedics who arrived on the scene and took him to the hospital. While Philip Narducci, The young would-be mob assassin had failed to kill Joe Salerno Sr. Nicky Scarfo's message had been delivered. If you betray me, I will find you and kill you. And if I cannot find you, I will kill your family. This ominous message still haunts many today, including Philip Leonetti, more than 2 decades after the shooting of Joe Salerno Sr. The shooting of Salerno Sr. made front-page news in Philadelphia and all throughout South Jersey, and the headlines were the kind that little Nicky loved. The day after the shooting, there were more cops following us than ever. They were everywhere. My uncle said to me, "Look at all these cocksuckers watching us. They got nothing better to do." I knew we had made a big mistake when my uncle ordered the hit on Joe Salerno's father, and I think my uncle did too, but he would never say it. If Scarfo didn't know that trying to kill the father of a federally protected witness was likely to draw the ire of law enforcement, he would get the message loud and clear less than a week later, when the FBI arrested him on Georgia Avenue and whisked him away. We were standing in front of the office, when all of a sudden here comes the cops up the street. It was a one-way, and they were coming in both directions, like 5 or 6 cars. It was just me and my uncle. There's like 20 guys. They all got guns. My uncle says, "What the fuck is all this?" And they moved in and grabbed him, handcuffed him, and threw him in the back of one of the cars. They grabbed me, but they let me go once he was in the car. They were only there for him. Before they pulled off, I heard him say, "Call Bobby," and that was it. They were gone. It was the FBI. I knew he was in trouble. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Camden had filed a motion to revoke Scarfo's bail pending appeal because they claimed to have evidence that he had violated the conditions of his bail by associating with convicted felons. The judge took the unusual step of issuing a body warrant for Scarfo, in lieu of scheduling a hearing first. Scarfo was taken directly to the Camden County Jail and placed in solitary confinement to await his hearing. The next day I went to Philadelphia to see Bobby Simone, and Bobby told me, "This is because of what happened down in Wildwood. There's too much heat." I told Bobby, "You gotta get me in to see my uncle. I need to talk to him." 2 days later, Bobby arranged for me to visit my uncle inside the jail. It had been almost 10 years since I had visited my uncle in jail when he was in Yardville, and I found myself thinking of how much had happened over those 10 years, how many guys had been killed, all the stuff we had done, and how things seemed to be spiraling out of control. Then my uncle suddenly appeared on the other side of the glass and picked up the phone. I could tell right away he was agitated. He started complaining right away. He said, "Tell Bobby to get me out of this place right away. This place is a fucking toilet, and I cannot stay here. Tell him I don't give a fuck where they send me. They can send me to Russia. I don't give a fuck, but I cannot stay here." I said, "Okay, I'll go see him." My uncle takes his finger and points at me and says, "On this side, and the guy over the bridge on that side. Got it?" And I nodded my head, yes. He was saying he wanted me to run everything on this side of the bridge, meaning New Jersey, while he was gone, and he wanted Chucky to run everything on the other side of the bridge, meaning Philadelphia. He then took his hand and held it out like he was trying to demonstrate someone's height. He made the height very low, and I knew immediately that he was talking about Harry Ricobene. He said, "Tell your friend over there that I said him and his friends need to start acting right and stop playing games." He's looking at me through the glass, and his eyes are really big as he is saying it, meaning for me to tell Salvi that him and his crew need to start killing the Ricobenes and to stop botching the hits. My uncle always talked in circles, but I knew what he was saying because I knew what he was thinking. Then he said, "Bobby says I'm looking at 1.5 years," and he shrugged his shoulders like he didn't give a fuck, but I know he did. My uncle hated jail. All he ever did was bitch and complain when he was locked up. Now he's going on about the food, the guards, the noise, the black kids with their boom boxes, the dust, and all I'm thinking is how great it is going to be to not have to deal with him for the next 18 months. I couldn't wait for them to ship him the fuck out. I was hoping they'd send him to Alaska. 2 days later, Nicodemo Scarfo's bail was revoked, and he was immediately driven to the Philadelphia International Airport, where he boarded a plane with 2 U.S. Marshals and was flown directly to El Paso, Texas. and sent to the La Tuna Federal Correctional Center to serve his sentence. Little Nicky was a long way from Atlantic City and would stay there for the rest of 1982, for all of 1983, and into 1984. In his absence, the murder and mayhem would continue. But for his nephew, Philip Leonetti, life was about to change. The day after they shipped my uncle to Texas, I remember waking up and I couldn't have been happier. I felt free for the first time in my life. I can't even describe the feeling. It was as if I had beaten cancer and had a new lease on life. I remember going up to the boardwalk and walking all the way from Georgia Avenue down to the end of the boardwalk in Ventnor as if I didn't have a care in the world. I was just walking and staring out at the ocean. At that moment, I didn't give a fuck about my uncle, Harry Ricobene, the mob, none of it. It was like I was living a different life. That night, I took my girl out for a nice dinner at the Knife and Fork, which was one of the best restaurants in Atlantic City. I was constantly running around day and night with my uncle 24/7. He never shut down, so I never shut down. And now, here I was, relaxing, having a night out. I couldn't remember the last time I had been out with her where I wasn't worried about what time I had to get home or what time I had to meet someone for my uncle. My girl told me that I was smiling the whole night. Philip Leonetti's girlfriend was accustomed to his daily routine, as she lived directly across the street from the Scarfo compound on Georgia Avenue. She was also somewhat familiar with the life of a mobster, as she had once dated Vincent Falcone, and was dating him when Philip killed him in December 1979. She was the one who came by the office and asked if I knew where Vince was right after I killed him. Maria. Me and her started dating a few months after I killed Vince, and at the time she had no idea that I had killed him. We never talked about him. It was as if he had never existed. In addition to having a steady girlfriend for more than a year, Philip Leonetti had something else in his personal life, an 8-year-old son. Philip Jr. was born in March 1974, right before my 21st birthday. I wasn't much of a father in the beginning, because I had put La Cosa Nostra first, which is what you are supposed to do when you take your oath. This thing is supposed to come before everything, even your family and your own kids, and for me, it did. But now I was starting to have second thoughts about this life, mainly because I was so sick of being around my uncle and just the way that he was, all the killings, all of the treachery. Maria and I started taking little Philip places like the movies, the Ocean City Boardwalk, the Philadelphia Zoo, things I would never do when my uncle was around. He'd go crazy if he found out I took my kid to the zoo. He would have said, "What are you, a jerk-off? Going there looking at animals?" But I was having the time of my life with Maria and Philip. I never felt so alive in all of my life. Just as Philip Leonetti was starting to get accustomed to life without his uncle, a phone call from an angry and agitated Nicky Scarfo from a Texas prison would snap him back to reality. I was in my grandmother's apartment with my mother and little Philip, and the phone rings, and my grandmother asked me to pick it up, and it says, "You have a collect call from Nick." I almost got sick to my stomach hearing his voice. I accepted the charges, and before he was connected, the operator said, "This call is from an inmate at a federal institution, and it will be monitored and recorded." And the next thing I hear is him screaming into the phone, "Where the fuck have you been? I've been trying to get you for 2 fucking weeks and you are nowhere to be found. Did you go to Philadelphia? Did you do what I asked? I'm sitting down here like a jerk-off while you're out gallivanting." I cut him right off and said, "I've been busy with Scarf Inc. I've got a couple new jobs." And he says, "Fuck Scarf Inc. and fuck those jobs." He is still hollering into the phone, and I hand the phone to my grandmother and say, "Here, you talk to him." And I left the house. When I got outside, I knew my uncle was steaming. I had never talked to him like that, or even talked back to him. But I was sick and tired of all of his ranting and raving. While I'm standing outside the office, who comes walking up the street but the Blade? Now, according to my uncle, I'm supposed to kill him. I say, "Hey, Nick, want to grab something to eat?" And he says, "Sure, Philip." and we walked to Caesar's. Me and him had been there a few times, and we were there together on the night that Ange had gotten killed. While we're eating, the Blade says, "I know your uncle's mad at me." I say, "Nick, my uncle's mad at everybody. He's mad at me, too." And we both started laughing. And he said, "I know, Philip. It's just hard for me sometimes." You see, the Blade had a young son who had drowned and died, and the Blade used to carry a picture of him around, and he would get fall-down drunk and talk about what had happened with his son. And then after a while he'd start trouble and get into a fight. I understood why he was the way he was. It wasn't his fault. Philip Leonetti was no longer his uncle's robot. He started thinking for himself and making his own decisions. And killing Nick the Blade wasn't going to happen. A few days later, Chucky drives down from Philadelphia, and me, him, and Lawrence go to Angeloni's for dinner. He says, "Bobby Simone came to see me. He talked to your uncle, and your uncle wants you and Bobby to go down to Texas to see him." I said to Chucky, "Hey, Chuck, you want to come down with us? We'll have a good time." And Chucky said, "He didn't ask for me, just you and Bobby." And we both laughed. If anyone knew my uncle besides me, it was Chucky. He and Chucky had been hanging since the 50s. Chucky knew my uncle like the back of his hand. I think, like me, Chucky was enjoying not having my uncle around. So the next day I'm in the office and the phone rings, and it's my uncle. It's the same routine with the collect call, only this time, when he gets on, he's not screaming. He says, "I'm glad I got you. How are things going? How is Scarf Inc.?" Now I know he could care less about Scarf Inc., but this is his way of breaking the ice a little bit. I say, "Scarf Inc. is good. Everything is good." He says, "Good. I'm glad to hear it." He says, "I want you and Bobby to come down and see me. You'll like it down here. It's right on the border of Mexico. The Rio Grande is right there." I say, "Oh, yeah?" And he says, "Yeah." I tell him, "We will set it up and get down there before Christmas." And my uncle seemed happy with that. I'm thinking to myself, now we're making small talk. I think my uncle knew I was getting sick of all the bullshit. Then I told him I had dinner with Chucky and Lawrence, and he asked how they were doing. Again, more small talk. And then I couldn't help myself. I said, "Guess who else I had dinner with?" And he said, "Who?" And I said, "The Blade." He said, "You had dinner with him?" I said, "Yeah, we went to Caesar's. He apologized for all of that trouble, and he's trying to clean his act up." Now, by saying this, I am telling my uncle that I am not going to kill the Blade. Surprisingly, my uncle says, "Good, good. Tell him I said hello, and tell him I said to knock it off with the drinking and to start coming around more." While Nicky Scarfo seemed to be somewhat humbled by being away from his gang, Philip Leonetti knew that it, like his little break, wouldn't last long. I knew it was only a matter of time before he was screaming and yelling again. That's just how he was. In the meantime, it was back to work for me. With Nicky Scarfo tucked away in a dusty federal prison over 2,000 miles away in El Paso, Texas, his longtime friend and underboss, Salvatore Chucky Merlino, was calling the shots on the streets in South Philadelphia, while his 29-year-old nephew, Philip Leonetti, was overseeing the family's New Jersey operation. On most days I was in the office or I was taking meetings with guys in restaurants. I'd usually have either Lawrence or Saul Kane with me, and sometimes the Blade. Blackie Napoli was coming down from Newark twice a month to bring my uncle's money, and the guys from Trenton were coming down once or twice a month. I was meeting with the Tachetta brothers, who were with Tumac Achaturo and the North Jersey branch of the Lucchese crime family, and I was seeing a lot of Sammy the Bull Gravano, who was with the Gambinos. Me and Sammy started getting real close. He'd always stop by the office if he came to Atlantic City, and me and him would go out to dinner. When all of these guys would come down to Atlantic City, out of respect, they would check in with my uncle. Now, with him gone, they were checking in with me. We'd go out to dinner. We'd talk about who was doing what, who was making moves. Most of the time I'd get an envelope with cash, usually a few $1,000s, as tribute money for my uncle. Even with little Nicky behind bars, the Scarfo mob continued to earn, and earn big. Leonetti estimates that he collected almost $3 million in cash for his uncle during the 17 months that he was behind bars. The street tax money coming down every month from Philadelphia could range from $50,000 to $100,000. It depended on what was going on. Don't forget, we still had our bookmaking and loan sharking operations, and we were involved in a million other deals. Making money wasn't the problem for us. I'd always pick the money up directly from Chucky, and I'd bring it home, and I would count it out with Nicky Jr. Without fail, no matter what the amount was, it would always be light a few $100s. I knew Chucky wasn't skimming $300 or $400. He was making tens of thousands of dollars himself. I believed it was his son Joey who was robbing the money. Joey Merlino was always a no-good kid. He was a punk even as a teenager, 18 or 19 years old. He was constantly starting trouble in Atlantic City, and my uncle would always make me straighten it out. He would bet with bookmakers who were with us and not pay them when he lost. Then he would lie and say that it wasn't him. On top of that, I believe he was robbing the money that was coming down from Philadelphia to Atlantic City, from me and my uncle. Around that time, I wanted to kill him, but he was Chucky's son, and I know there was no way my uncle would sanction it. At that time, my uncle liked this kid very much because the two of them were very much alike, and Joey was always respectful around my uncle. Plus, Chucky was my uncle's best friend, and he was the underboss, and Joey and Nicky Jr. were also the best of friends. I thought he was no good, and if I could have, I would have killed him. While Philip Leonetti was busy in Atlantic City, Salvi Testa and his young executioner's crew were still on the front lines of the Scarfo mob's war with the Rico Bene faction. A couple times a week, my uncle would call and say things like, "Did Salvi clean that boat yet? Tell him to get the boat clean," which was his way of saying tell Salvi and his guys to get the Rico Benes. He would say, "Tell him the whole boat, top to bottom, clean the whole thing," which meant he wanted everyone dead, Harry and his whole crew. In December 1982, Harry the Hunchback Rico Bene was jailed on a parole violation for possession of a handgun during a traffic stop. Already convicted on a slew of federal racketeering charges, the Hunchback was out on an appeal bond when he violated. Rico Bene was immediately whisked away to jail, and like his arch-nemesis, Nicky Scarfo, the Hunchback was forced to command his assault effort from behind bars. Right before Christmas, me and Bobby Simone flew down to Texas to see my uncle, like I had promised him. He seemed to be in good spirits because he knew we were making a lot of money, but he was still hell-bent on killing all of Harry's guys, even with Harry in jail. When we got down to Texas and went to the jail, they would only let Bobby in, and told me I was prohibited from having any unsupervised contact with my uncle. I said no problem, and I told Bobby to meet me back at the hotel when he was done. Truth be told, I was okay not seeing him. I actually preferred it. I was enjoying my time away from him, especially my time with Maria and little Philip. I decided to drive around a little bit, and boy, was I out of place. It was all cowboys and Mexicans down there. I felt like I was on another planet. I knew my uncle couldn't have been happy in there, and now I knew what he meant when he said that the other prisoners in La Tuna were not our kind of people. My uncle had told me that the whole place was full of Mexican guys and black guys. He said, "There's not two white guys in this whole fucking place." The Mexican mafia was very big down there, and there were a lot of fights in that jail, a lot of stabbings. My uncle kept to himself while he was in there, but he had two Mexican guys who were with him the whole time he was there. He called them his pistoleros, and they served as his bodyguards. He'd have me send money to put on their books or do things for their families. These guys were dirt poor, but they were loyal, and like my uncle, they were stone killers. My uncle told me when he got out, he said, "I wish I had 10 more guys just like them." So I'm back at the hotel, and I'm in the lobby having a drink, and in comes Bobby back from the prison and seeing my uncle. I say, "Hey, Bob, how did it go?" And he says, "You know how he is." And we both smiled. He said, "Let me go upstairs and freshen up a bit, and I'll be right down." Bobby and I were staying in the best suite in the hotel, but remember, we were in El Paso, not Beverly Hills. 5 minutes later, Bobby pages me, and he's out of breath, and I can barely make out what he's saying. He tells me that when he put the key in the room, he sees two guys in the room dressed like maintenance workers, and that they seemed startled to see him and hurried out of the room once he arrived. Now, my mind is racing. I'm thinking, is this a hit? Was someone there to kill me? There was no reason to kill Bobby. He was our lawyer. No one wanted to kill him, except maybe the prosecutors and judges he dealt with. But I was a captain in La Cosa Nostra, and my uncle was the boss, and here I am 2,000 miles away from Atlantic City. Like Harry Ricobeni in that phone booth, I realized I was essentially a sitting duck. 2 minutes later, Bobby's down in the lobby, and I tell him, we're out of here. We need to pack our bags and go back home. And Bobby agrees. We were supposed to be there all weekend, and Bobby was supposed to go see my uncle the next morning. We went to the room and packed our stuff and drove right to the airport and got on the first plane back to Philadelphia. On the plane, I tell Bobby, that was either a hit or the FBI trying to bug our room. Either way, I don't like it. And Bobby agreed. When he arrived in Philadelphia, Leonetti rounded up Chucky Merlino and Salvi Testa and told them what had happened in El Paso. We all agreed that we needed to be on guard and make sure everybody in the family was on point. The next day, my uncle called and wanted to know what happened with the second visit, and he was stunned when I told him what had happened in the room. I could hear it in his voice. He said, Jesus Christ, did you get a look at them? And I told him, no, only Bobby saw them. He said, you made the right move leaving. Make sure everyone back home tightens their belts. I don't like what I'm hearing here. It was never determined if this was a botched hit attempt on Philip Leonetti or the FBI attempting to plant a bug in his hotel suite, but it was determined that the two men inside the hotel room were not maintenance workers. We checked it out at the hotel, and they told us there was no work being done in any of the rooms, and Bobby contacted a lawyer down there to look into it, and the lawyer told him the same thing. Life in the mob was certainly unpredictable. From behind bars, Nicky Scarfo was sending messages to his nephew Philip Leonetti and to his street boss, Salvi Testa, to clean the boat, and to make sure they cleaned the whole boat, top to bottom. Scarfo wasn't referring to the boat that Testa kept in a Ventnor marina, nor was he talking about the cabin cruiser he and Leonetti had docked out by Harrah's Casino in Atlantic City. He was cryptically instructing Testa and his young executioner's crew to finish the Ricobene War by killing anyone and everyone connected to rival Harry the Hunchback Ricobene, who, like Scarfo, was behind bars. As 1983 got underway, the Scarfo mob was back to doing what it did best, killing people. On January 27th, the body of Robert Hornickel, a low-level South Philadelphia drug dealer who had run afoul of Scarfo's street tax, was found in the trunk of his car. With Harry the Hunchback Ricobene locked up, his brother Mario, Sonny Ricobene, was running the gang. This made him Salvi Testa's #1 target, as the Scarfo mob hitmen escalated their murderous efforts to appease their jailed boss. Pat Spirito was one of the guys in Giancalini's crew. I never liked him. I thought he was a crybaby and didn't think he was much of a gangster. But he was a decent earner, and he led one of the crews that was out collecting the street tax. Salvi gave Pat and his crew the Sonny Ricobene contract. At the time, Pat had Nicky Crow, Charlie White, and Junior Stano in his crew, and they all reported to Giancalini. That was about to change. We were getting reports that Pat and his guys were dogging it, not doing what they were ordered to do. None of them guys in that crew were killers, except for Charlie White. Pat, the Crow, Junior, they were all neighborhood guys, knockaround guys. They weren't gangsters. So one day I'm with Chucky, Salvi, and Giancalini, and we decide that Pat Spirito needs to go, that we need to kill him to send a message to everyone in our family that we mean business, and that an order is an order. I knew my uncle wanted to kill Pat since the day he made him. After he got made, Pat came up to my uncle and said, "You know, Nick, you should think about making Patty Specs a captain." And my uncle just stared at him, like he couldn't believe this guy who just got made was telling him how to run the family. When he walked away, my uncle said, "Do you believe the balls on this fucking guy?" and Chucky said, "Nick, maybe we should get one of them suggestion boxes and let the guys give us ideas on how to run things, like they do at restaurants." Me and Chucky were laughing, and my uncle said, "Where do these fucking guys come from?" So Chucky ordered the Crow and Charlie White to kill Pat. A few weeks later, on April 29th, Charlie White Iannici, who was armed with a .38, shot Pasquale Pat the Cat Spirito in the back of the head as he sat in a parked car in South Philadelphia with Nicholas Nick the Crow Caramandi. As the war with the Rico Bennies continued, it became obvious that the Rico Bennies were losing their momentum. Harry the Hunchback was in jail, as were his top two soldiers, Joseph Padula and Victor DeLuca, both of whom were locked up for the attempted murder of Salvi Testa. Botched or aborted hits from both sides ensued for the next several months, until a Scarfo hit team supervised by Testa pumped multiple gunshots into Rico Benny soldier Frank Martinez as he got behind the wheel of his truck to drive to work on a foggy October morning in 1983. Two of the shooters on the hit team that got Martinez were the Narducci brothers, Chicky's sons, Frank Jr. and Philip. Frank Jr. had helped Salvi Testa set up and kill Rocco Marinucci in retaliation for Marinucci's involvement in the bombing that killed his father, Philip Chicken Man Testa. Frank Narducci Jr. gladly assisted Testa, despite knowing that Testa had personally murdered his father, Frank Sr., for the exact same reason that Marinucci had been killed, because the elder Narducci had also been involved in the murder of Philip Testa. Philip Narducci was the gunman who shot Joe Salerno Sr. in Wildwood Crest on direct orders from Nicky Scarfo himself, despite the fact it was Scarfo who had ordered his father killed only 6 months earlier. In a piece of twisted, blood-soaked underworld irony, Joe Salerno Sr. had been one of the first neighbors to find Chicky Narducci as he lay dying in the gutter, and the elder Salerno even went and got a neighborhood priest to come and read Narducci's last rites. Now, the Narducci brothers were two of Scarfo's go-to soldiers, members of Salvi Testa's young executioner's crew. They were two of Salvi's top guys, and my uncle had told them both before he went to jail that he wasn't going to hold them responsible for what their father had done. So despite the fact that we killed their father, they were with us. The reality is, they didn't have a choice. Years later, a witness who would testify against Scarfo, Leonetti, and the Narducci brothers would tell FBI agents that he was baffled as to how the Narduccis could swear blood allegiance to the man who had killed their father. "Never in a million fucking years will I understand that one," the witness would say in one of his debriefing sessions. Frank Martinez would survive the October 1983 ambush, but the incident served to break the street war wide open in favor of Scarfo and would foreshadow similar events with different outcomes over the next 2 months. On November 3rd, Philip Narducci and another member of Salvi Testa's young executioner's crew, Nicholas Nicky Whip Milano, the younger brother of Testa's close friend Eugene Gino Milano, shot and killed Sammy Tamburino, a Rico Benny loyalist who had previously been aligned with Scarfo. Tamburino was killed in a southwest Philadelphia arcade that served as his headquarters, and the killing took place in front of his mother, who stood and watched in horror. When Tamburino decided to shift his allegiance from Scarfo to Rico Benny, he did so in an effort to make more money, by filling the void that was left when the Hunchback, Joseph Padula, and Victor DeLuca went to jail. Tamburino had become close with Sonny Rico Benny, and he and Frank Martinez stood to inherit what remained of the lucrative Rico Benny crew if Sonny Rico Benny were to join his brother Harry behind bars. Mario Sonny Rico Benny had been arrested and charged in a massive 1980 federal racketeering case. Rico Benny's co-defendants included Angelo Bruno, Philip Testa, Chicky Narducci, and Pat Spirito, all of whom were killed either before the trial or prior to sentencing. Sonny Rico Benny's brother, Harry the Hunchback, was also convicted. The bail he put up while his appeal was pending got revoked when Philadelphia police discovered a gun in his car during a routine traffic stop. Only Sonny Ricobene and Scarfo Capo Joseph Chicky Ciancalini remained free on bail pending appeal, but both knew their days as free men were numbered. A month later, Scarfo's men would finally hit the jackpot, finding and killing one of the hunchback's own flesh and blood, his brother, Robert "Bobby" Ricobene. After stalking him the entire day of December 6th, a Scarfo death squad, made up of Charles "Charlie White" Iannici, Joseph "Joey Punge" Pungitori, and Francis "Faffy" Iannarella, caught Bobby exiting his car in the presence of his elderly mother. Similar to the Tamburino hit, little Nicky's men disregarded the callousness of rubbing out someone in front of his mother and attacked their prey on sight. Armed with a shotgun, Iannarella, a young, street-savvy, second-generation South Philadelphia gangster, approached Ricobene and his mother. When Ricobene spotted Iannarella, he took off, jumping a nearby fence in an attempt to escape the onslaught. His efforts would prove futile. Taking aim at his fleeing target, the former U.S. soldier, who had been decorated for his service in Vietnam before enlisting in Nicky Scarfo's La Cosa Nostra army, Faffy Iannarella blasted Ricobene to oblivion with a shot to the back of the head, dropping Bobby Ricobene as he was trying to climb the fence. Ricobene's mother, who tried to wrestle the shotgun from him. The scene was eerily reminiscent of the time her son Harry had wrestled a handgun from his assailant in a phone booth following an attempt on his life. Iannarella would take the butt of his shotgun and strike Ricobene's elderly mother in the face, sending the hysterically crying woman crashing to the ground. In a sick and perverted way, the murders of Bobby Ricobene and Sammy Tamburino in front of their mothers, like the shooting of Joe Salerno Sr., highlighted what had become the Scarfo family's specialty: raw, vicious, visceral, in-your-face, wanton violence. Honor and respect seemed to be a thing of the past. I wasn't happy when I found out that these two guys had been killed in front of their mothers, and I didn't agree with the shooting of Joe Salerno's father. But you have to understand, the Ricobene guys were trying to kill us. So, it was kill or be killed. This was a war in every sense of the word. Just like my uncle was ordering us to kill them from his jail cell, the hunchback was doing the same from his. Everyone knew the stakes were life or death. Scarfo, on the other hand, was ecstatic following the two high-profile mob murders. He would get the Philadelphia Inquirer in the mail, but it was always a few days behind. We couldn't talk on the phone and say, "Hey, we killed Bobby Ricobene today." So he'd make a comment and say, "How about the Eagles? They are playing terrific, aren't they?" That's what he would say if he was happy with what we were doing. If he wasn't happy, it would be, "How about these fucking Eagles? The whole team is lousy from top to bottom. They need to get rid of everybody and start over." That meant he was disgusted that we weren't doing our jobs. Following the shooting of Frank Martinez and the murders of Bobby Ricobene and Sammy Tamburino, the Ricobene faction seemed to be on its last leg. But a wounded animal is a dangerous animal, and Harry's gang wasn't done yet. A few days after Bobby Ricobene's murder, Salvi Testa was driving through South Philadelphia with members of his young executioner's crew, Joseph "Joey Punge" Pungitori, and the Milano brothers, Gino and Nicky Whip. Their car became boxed in by another car that was loaded with 4 Ricobene soldiers who jumped out of their car and opened fire in broad daylight. Luckily for Testa and his men, nobody was hit in the fusillade of bullets, and it proved to be one of the last assaults in the carnage-filled conflict that had rocked the underworld in South Philadelphia. There would be, however, one more casualty in the Ricobene War. A few days after Harry's guys tried to kill Salvi and Joe Punge, I drove up to Philly with Lawrence to go see a jeweler I did business with on Jewelers Row. It was a few weeks before Christmas, and I was going to pick up a watch for Maria. Me and Lawrence met Salvi at Virgilio's, and we went and saw the jeweler. I think we may have had Faffy with us. As we were leaving, we passed by a jewelry shop that was owned by Sonny Ricobene's son, Enrico. Salvi said, "Let's go in there and see what's on this kid's brain," meaning to see what he was thinking. I knocked on the window, and I saw Sonny's son coming towards the door, and then he froze when he saw who it was. I said, "Come on, we just want to talk to you," and I saw him retreat to the back of the store. With these jewelry stores, you had to be buzzed in. You couldn't just walk in the store. A few seconds later, a guy who worked there came to the window and said, "If you don't leave, we're calling the police." So we left. Moments later, Enrico Ricobene walked into his office at the rear of the store and put a pistol to the side of his head and pulled the trigger. He was so frightened by the sight of Philip Leonetti and Salvi Testa that he killed himself. He was 27 years old. Salvi Testa was now bragging. "We don't have to kill these guys anymore. They do it themselves." When the news of his nephew's suicide reached him in prison, Harry the Hunchback's heart and will were shattered. Things had gone too far. Both his brother and now his young nephew were dead. He was ready to give in and wave the white flag. During the first week of 1984, the Hunchback sent word to what remained of his crew that the war was over. Nicodemo "Little Nicky" Scarfo had won the war. The victory entitled Scarfo to everything that belonged to the Ricobenes, a treasure trove of illegal operations that he and his men would devour and add to their already overflowing stable of cash cow rackets. But all was not well in the ranks of the tumultuous Scarfo mob, despite the fact that it had won the Ricobene War and that Little Nicky was set to be released from prison in a matter of weeks. Those in Scarfo's inner circle didn't know it yet, but the plot would soon thicken and was about to get even more treacherous than it already was. The rules and parameters that Gotti spoke of included one edict that members of La Cosa Nostra routinely ignored: the prohibition against participating in the distribution of narcotics. Dealing drugs was an absolute violation of the rules, plain and simple. My uncle and I were 100% against anyone who sold drugs or used drugs. When my uncle became boss, he brought everyone in and told them the rules. A few days after that meeting, Raymond Long John Martirano asked to meet with my uncle, and I arranged for them to meet. Long John said, "Nick, I just want to make sure we are on the same page regarding the policy on drugs." And my uncle said, "I don't understand what you're asking." And Long John said, "Ange had the same policy, but he and I were heavily involved in the drug trade. We made a lot of money selling drugs together." My uncle and I were both shocked, and my uncle said, "You and Ange sold drugs together?" And Long John said, "Nick, the entire time Ange was boss, he was the biggest drug dealer in Philadelphia. Him, Phil Testa, and Caponegro. That's where they made most of their money." My uncle changed his tone and said very seriously, "Raymond, listen to me. If anyone in this family is involved with drugs from this day forward, and I find out about it, it's this." And he made the sign of the gun. By the summer of 1986, various members of the Scarfo organization had successfully circumvented the edict against being involved with the distribution of drugs by shaking down drug dealers and loaning them money, which, in essence, financed their operations. My uncle said it was okay to shake down the drug dealers with the street tax, and it was okay to lend them money with our loan sharking operation, but we were forbidden from getting directly involved with what they were doing. Many La Cosa Nostra bosses, like Lucky Luciano, Vito Genovese, and even Vincent the Chin Gigante, had been convicted of dealing heroin in their younger days, and black drug dealers were making piles of money selling cocaine in the 1980s. Several members of the Scarfo organization became directly and indirectly involved in the manufacturing and distribution of methamphetamine, more commonly known as meth, or crank, or speed, by obtaining and reselling phenyl-2-propanone, P2P, to cookers, who used P2P oil to make meth. A gallon of P2P could be obtained overseas for under $2,000 and resold to dealers in the United States for $20,000 or more. It was an offer that some in the Scarfo mob couldn't refuse. The first sign of trouble came when Saul Kane got indicted for labor racketeering with Stevie Traits and the Roofers Union, and then got indicted on a federal drug case, which was nonsense. Saul told me he never sold drugs a day in his life, and I believe him to this day. The feds alleged that Kane, who was 51 at the time, was the leader of an international drug operation that specialized in importing P2P into the United States and then wholesaling it to various drug operations. The indictment alleged that the operation made in excess of $24 million. Almost as quickly as Saul Kane and several of his top associates were rounded up, one of them began cooperating, and Kane was held without bail. Several other alleged Philadelphia meth dealers were rounded up in separate indictments that charged them with importing P2P and distributing meth, and shortly after they were charged, several of these individuals began to cooperate and point the finger at various made members of the Scarfo mob, including Ralph Jr. Steno, Charles Charlie White Iannici, Thomas Tommy Del Giorno, and Nicholas Nicky Crow Caramandi, as being directly or indirectly involved in importing, manufacturing, and distributing both P2P and methamphetamine. Indictments were being prepared, but for tactical reasons, they were kept under seal. In addition to his involvement in the P2P case, Nicholas Nick the Crow Caramandi had not heeded Nicky Scarfo's warning about being careful in his dealings with Philadelphia City Councilman Leland Beloff. The Crow was caught trying to extort $1 million from a prominent Philadelphia land developer. Using and mentioning his connections to both Leland Beloff and Nicky Scarfo in his dealings with a representative for the developer, who was actually an undercover FBI agent. On June 27, 1986, Caramandi was arrested, but 11 days later the charges against him were dropped. The Crow comes down to Atlantic City to see my uncle and tells him that the case is bullshit and that's why the feds dropped the charges. But my uncle spoke to Bobby Simone, and Bobby told him that he thought the feds were going to re-indict the case down the road, and that their ultimate goal was to include my uncle in the indictment, even though my uncle never met the developer or the undercover agent. My uncle didn't seem to be too concerned about it, and neither was I. Another problem Nicky Scarfo was having at the time was with Tommy Del Giorno, one of the men supervising his mob's street operation in South Philadelphia. The same thing that had happened towards the end with Chucky was happening with Tommy Dell. He was drunk 7 days a week, and my uncle took him down, just like he did to Chucky. My uncle said to me, "We got to get this thing back on track, from top to bottom." He knew that our organization was in bad shape. What Scarfo had no way of knowing at that time was exactly how bad things actually were. With Tommy Del Giorno taken down from captain to soldier, the 39-year-old Francis Faffy Iannarella became the family's new Philadelphia street boss. There was just a sense that things were falling apart around us. It's hard to explain, but the regime just wasn't the same. After Salvi got killed, and then the thing with Chucky and Lawrence, it just kept going downhill from there. And things were about to go from bad to worse. In October 1986, Nicholas Nick the Crow Caramandi was rearrested in the extortion case involving Willard Rouse, the real estate developer he tried to shake down for $1 million. He was held in a Philadelphia prison without bail. At Caramandi's bail hearing, the U.S. attorney laid out for the judge the government's belief that Caramandi was a career criminal and made member of the Scarfo mob, while also claiming that Caramandi figured prominently in both the P2P case, which remained under seal, and the 1983 murder of Pat Spirito. Caramandi, who had known Scarfo since the early 1970s, understood that the volatile mob boss was furious that Caramandi had talked so recklessly in mentioning both Scarfo's name and La Cosa Nostra when dealing with the man he was trying to extort, who was both an FBI agent and was wearing a wire. My uncle had told him to be careful and use his head, but the Crow decided to act like a gangster, which he wasn't, and he started shooting off at the mouth, playing a role, and he buried himself. On November 3, 1986, the New Jersey Attorney General's office unsealed an indictment against Nicky Scarfo, Philip Leonetti, and 16 others, charging them with racketeering, money laundering, and bookmaking. The backbone of the case was a series of secretly recorded wiretap conversations in which a drunken Tommy Del Giorno openly discussed mob business and expressed his dissatisfaction with his mob superiors, namely Little Nicky and Crazy Phil. On the eve of the indictment being announced, detectives from the New Jersey State Police visited Del Giorno at his South Philadelphia home and played the tapes for him in an effort to turn him into a cooperating witness. Tommy Del knew that once Scarfo and Leonetti heard the tapes, he would become a dead man walking, as the two mob leaders predictably made bail shortly after they were arraigned, posting $400,000 and $300,000 respectively. The other 16 defendants named in the indictment were given court dates for early January. A week later, Tommy Del Giorno became the first made member of the Scarfo mob to defect from La Cosa Nostra and enter into an agreement to cooperate with the government. 3 days later, Nick the Crow Caramandi would become the second. Both men were now cooperating with the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office in the multiple investigations that were ongoing against Nicodemo Scarfo, Philip Leonetti, and the entire Philadelphia Atlantic City La Cosa Nostra, investigations which included all of the unsolved mob murders that Scarfo and Leonetti had ordered and participated in, dating back to their early Atlantic City days in the late 1970s, up through the Frankie Flowers murder in July 1985. I remember Bobby Simone came down after the news of Tommy Del and Nick the Crow broke and said, "Nick, it's not good." And my uncle knew it. My uncle said, "How long before they come to get me?" And Bobby said, "It could be a day, could be a week, could be a year, but they're definitely coming." The next day, me and my uncle went to Angeloni's for lunch, and the mood was very somber. He knew his days were numbered. He told me, "If they lock me up, and I can't make bail, and you're not in the cell next to me, you're in charge for as long as I'm locked up. You will get messages either directly from me through Bobby or through Nicky Jr." I tried to lighten the mood by saying, "Uncle Nick, you think any jury is going to believe Tommy Del or Nicky the Crow? It'll be just like the Falcone case with Joe Salerno. We'll get the best lawyers and we will fight them and we will win, just like we did before." Now, at this time, between the two of us, we had almost $3 million, and my uncle said, "You're right, fuck 'em. Fuck Tommy Del, fuck Nicky the Crow, and fuck the feds. Fuck 'em all. We ain't laying down for none of them." As the feds meticulously debriefed Del Giorno and Caramandi in separate locations, they were obtaining an insight into the dark world of La Cosa Nostra under the despotic Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo. Right before Christmas of that year, 1986, me and my uncle headed down to Florida, to Casablanca South for a few days. Spike was down there, and he tried to cheer us up, but it was gloom and doom ever since we found out that those guys had flipped. I went back to Atlantic City right before New Year's, 1987, and my uncle stayed down there a few more days with his girlfriend at the time, who we all called Chicago. On January 7th, 1987, the remaining 16 defendants in the New Jersey State racketeering indictment were all arraigned and subsequently released on bail. Among those charged were Fafi Iannarella, Scarfo's Philadelphia street boss, Joseph Joe Pungatori, Joseph Grand and his brother Salvatore Wayne Grand, all four of whom were allegedly involved in the Salvatore Testa murder, and Joseph Legambi, the alleged triggerman in the Frankie Flowers murder. This arraignment took place 5 years to the day that Frank Chicky Narducci was ambushed and murdered by Salvi Testa and Joseph Joe Pungatori for his role in the murder of Testa's father, Philip Testa. Those 5 years essentially defined the rise and the fall of Little Nicky Scarfo's mafia empire. The next day, January 8th, 1987, would mark Nicodemo Scarfo's final day as a free man. As the 57-year-old mafia don emerged from an Air Brit flight from Fort Lauderdale to Atlantic City, he was swarmed by a half-dozen FBI agents and taken into custody on charges that he had conspired with Nicholas "Nick the Crow" Caramandi and Philadelphia City Councilman Leland Beloff in the attempted $1 million extortion from Philadelphia land developer Willard Rouse. Sporting a business suit and a cashmere overcoat, Scarfo had a deep winter tan as he smiled for reporters and photographers documenting his arrival and subsequent arrest. Scarfo was taken to FBI headquarters in Linwood, New Jersey for processing, and then held overnight at the Cape May County Jail, some 30 miles south of Atlantic City. Scarfo would then be transferred to a detention center in Philadelphia to await a bail hearing, and less than a week later, little Nicky was formally denied bail. His 33-year-old nephew, Philip Leonetti, was now the acting boss of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob. When my uncle went to jail, we were in bad shape. It wasn't like when he was in La Tuna and me, Chucky, Lawrence, and Salvi kept things going. This time around, there was nobody left. Salvi was dead, Chucky was in a jail cell in Camden, and Lawrence wasn't really around anymore. It was basically me and Faffy, and guys like Joe Punge. We all had cases pending, and we knew we were going to get locked up. It was only a matter of time. For the first 2 months of 1987, Philip Leonetti attempted to use men like Francis Faffy Iannarella in Philadelphia and Pasquale Patty Specs Martirano in North Jersey to carry out his uncle's orders. Orders that basically consisted of making sure that Scarfo's street tax and tribute money were being collected and sent down to Leonetti in Atlantic City for his uncle's safekeeping. I was meeting a couple times a week with Bobby Simone, and Bobby had introduced me to a lawyer friend of his named Oscar Goodman from Las Vegas. Bobby told me, "Oscar's one of the best lawyers in the country. If you get arrested, I want him sitting next to you." I was going to see my uncle once or twice a week in Philadelphia, and I would go and see Faffy when I got done visiting my uncle to pick up our money, or to hear what was going on in Philadelphia. I was basically going through the motions, doing what my uncle wanted, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. I knew it was only a matter of time before it was lights out. In early March, Leonetti and Maria boarded a plane and headed to Scarfo's South Florida estate, Casablanca South, for 2 weeks of rest and relaxation. It was me and Maria, and we had a ball down there. It was the two of us and Spike. Spike and Maria were both amazing cooks, and they would try to outdo one another, but she would always win. We would sit by the pool all day or take the boat out. Those 2 weeks were like being in heaven with everything that was going on. I knew the reality of the situation we were in, but I didn't want to face it. Several weeks later, on April 9th, 1987, Philip Leonetti would be forced to face that reality when he was arrested as he drove from Atlantic City to Philadelphia to meet with Bobby Simone. It was me and Tori Scafidi in the car, and I noticed the whole time we were driving that we were being followed by what seemed like at least 5 cars. I said to Tori, "I think I'm going to be arrested." We drove over the Ben Franklin Bridge and into Center City and headed towards Bobby's office, which was near Rittenhouse Square. When we got to 19th and Walnut, the cops were everywhere. They came from behind us. They came the wrong way down Walnut and got in front of us. They came from the park. They were everywhere. They grabbed me and Tori and handcuffed us and put us in separate cars. Bobby must have seen all of the commotion and came down from his office. And when he came over to the car and I said, "Bobby, what am I being arrested for?" And he said, "The murder of Salvi Testa." Police records show that Leonetti and Scafidi were arrested at 1:40 p.m., and 15 minutes later, at 1:55 p.m., Francis Faffy Iannarella was arrested inside the Scarfo mob's primary clubhouse, a social club at the corner of Camac and Moore, in the heart of South Philadelphia, a half-block away from Passyunk Avenue and the candy shop where Salvi Testa was executed. By 6 p.m. that night, Joseph Joe Punge Pungatori, Salvatore Wayne Grand, and his brother Joseph all former members of Salvi Testa's young executioner's crew, and the three principals charged in his murder were behind bars with Leonetti, Iannarella, and Scafidi. A separate indictment unsealed the next day charged the already jailed Nicodemo Scarfo and the entire hierarchy of his criminal organization with numerous racketeering offenses, including the murder of Judge Edwin Halfant in 1978, the murder of Vincent Falcone in 1979, the murder of John Calabrese in 1981, the murder of Frank Chicky Narducci Sr. in 1982, the murders of Pat Spirito, Sammy Tamburino, and Robert Ricobene in 1983, and finally, the murder of Salvatore Salvi Testa in 1984. Several attempted murders and dozens of other crimes were included in the indictment, which was based primarily on the testimony from cooperating witnesses Tommy Del Giorno and Nicholas Nick the Crow Caramandi, both of whom had defected from the mob in November 1986. We were all in jail, and none of us got bail. The only guy that they let out on bail was Joe Punge's brother Anthony. The rest of us were locked up in one of two prisons, either Holmesburg or the detention center, both of which were in Philadelphia. I was in Holmesburg with my uncle, Joe Legambi, Lawrence, Joe Punge, Faffy, and a couple other guys. I think Torrey was with us, and the Narducci brothers. My uncle was getting ready to go on trial in the Rouse extortion case, and the rest of us were just getting acclimated to being locked up. Prior to that, none of us had ever been locked up for more than a couple of days, except for my uncle. I remember one day out in the yard we were all together, and my uncle said, "We're going to stick together, and we're going to beat this thing." A few weeks later, on May 6, 1987, a federal jury convicted Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo of conspiracy and extortion stemming from his involvement in the attempted extortion of Philadelphia land developer Willard Rouse. On August 4, 1987, Nicky Scarfo was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison following his conviction in the Rouse case. The next thing that happened is that me, my uncle, Chucky, Faffy, Junior Stano, and Charlie White all got hit with an 848 continuing criminal enterprise on the P2P case, which they unsealed when we got locked up. Of all of the cases they tried to bring, this one was the absolute worst. We did a lot of stuff. Murder, loan sharking, extortion, you name it. But we weren't drug dealers. The jury in that case agreed, and acquitted Scarfo, Leonetti, Merlino, and Iannarella of all charges. Ralph Jr. Stano and Charlie White Iannici were both fugitives, and at that time, neither had been caught. When the jury found us not guilty, the courtroom went nuts. During the commotion, my uncle walked over to the jury box and shook hands with one of the female jurors, and one of the marshals came over and grabbed him. My uncle said, "I just wanted to shake their hands. Thank God for them. This is the beginning of the end of the lies and those liars." He was talking about Tommy Dell and the Crow. The judge was banging his gavel and saying, "Order, order," and the U.S. Attorney Barry Gross said something under his breath to my uncle, telling him to shut up, and my uncle screamed back, "No, you shut the fuck up." As they were leading us from the courtroom back to jail, my uncle stopped and screamed at the prosecutors, "Who lied? Caramandi and Del Giorno, that's who. Two lying no-good rats, that's all you got." Then, in the direction of the FBI agents in the room, my uncle said, "And you stay away from our women." You should have seen their faces. They looked like they wanted to cry. Down in the holding cell, we were celebrating, hugging and kissing each other on the cheek. It was the first time in almost 2 years that me and my uncle were together with Chucky, and everything seemed normal between us, like old times. We were all so happy that we beat the case. When we got back to Holmesburg, the whole place went nuts. They had seen that we won on TV. Guys were banging on their doors and cheering, and when we got back to our cell block, which was D block, everyone was lined up waiting for us. Lawrence, Joe Punge, Joe Legambi, Philip and Frankie Narducci. It felt real good to beat the government again. Philip Leonetti, now 34, had been found not guilty in the 1980 trial for murdering Vincent Falcone the year before, and now, in 1987, he was found not guilty in the P2P drug case. As 1987 came to a close, a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer, who happened to be taking a tour of Holmesburg for a story he was writing about the prison, was amazed when he saw Nicky Scarfo exiting his cell on D Block. The reporter, John Wustendijk, wrote the following. Wearing a spotless white T-shirt tucked into prison-issued blue pants, his gray hair neatly swooped back from his forehead, inmate 87-00475 walked easily through the open doorway of cell 425 on D Block at Holmesburg Prison. The story goes on to say that Scarfo appeared relatively comfortable, at ease among friends in Philadelphia's toughest and most run-down prison, and quoted prison officials who said that Scarfo was courteous and polite to correctional officers and spent a lot of time reading the newspapers, exercising, and working on his legal case, never straying too far from his inmate bodyguards. For the most part, we didn't bother anyone, and nobody bothered us. One time, I got into an argument with an inmate, a big black guy. They said he was a drug kingpin or something. He had a big mouth on him, and he was always breaking somebody's balls, usually the younger, smaller black guys. One day I told him to knock it off, and he didn't like being challenged. One thing led to another, and we had a little altercation, and the guards broke us up before it got serious. As a result of the altercation, Leonetti got 5 days in solitary confinement, locked in an 8-by-10-foot concrete cell for 24 hours a day, and the prisoner was immediately transferred to another prison amidst internal reports that Leonetti planned to kill the big black guy over the incident. We never saw him again, and the other kids that I stood up for were so happy that he got transferred that when I came out of the hole after doing the 5 days, they were cheering for me. Scarfo, Leonetti, and the rest of their gang would sit behind bars as 1987 turned to 1988, awaiting the Salvi Testa murder trial, which was scheduled for April, and for the massive RICO trial, which was set for September. With all of us locked up, most of what was going on outside, the street tax and the rest of the stuff we were involved in, had all but dried up. My uncle put his cousin Anthony Piccolo, who he made the consigliere right before he went to jail, in charge out on the street. He was now the street boss. It was him and Nicky Jr. who would collect the money and keep things in order. Nicky Jr. would come and see me or my uncle once or twice a week and let us know what was going on and who was paying and who wasn't paying and who was playing games. We'd send messages through him to guys on the street, but our main focus was meeting with the lawyers and fighting the cases. As the Testa murder trial began in Philadelphia Common Pleas Court, Leonetti felt confident in facing Caramandi and Del Giorno, having just prevailed several months prior in the P2P case. It was me, my uncle, Chucky, Faffy, Joe Punch, Torrey, Wayne Grand, Joe Grant, and Charlie White that were on trial. Bobby Simone represented my uncle. I had Oscar Goodman, and Chucky had Ed Jacobs. I'll never forget how Bobby told the jury in his opening statement that "You will never hear testimony from people more corrupt and disgusting," meaning the Crow and Tommy Dell. Apparently, the jury agreed with Simone, and on May 10, 1988, after deliberating for only 6 hours, the jury found Scarfo, Leonetti, and the 7 others not guilty of murdering Salvi Testa. A few days after we beat the Testa case, I was out in the yard playing basketball, and my uncle comes over and motions for me to come over to where he was standing. He says, "I talked to Bobby, and he thinks there is a good chance that you can make bail and get out of here." So I said, "Wow, that's great news." My uncle's wife had gambled away a lot of money in the casinos, and when my uncle found out about it, he went nuts. He said, "Just make sure Nicky Jr. doesn't know it was us." This is how evil he was. He wanted me the mother of his children, which I never would have done in a million years. He hated her. He only called her that motherfucker. That's the only way I ever remember him referring to her. My uncle also wanted me to kill both Joey and Wayne Grand if they made bail, because he heard that they had gotten one of my cousins involved in dealing drugs. My uncle said if you find out it's true, both of them get this, and he made the sign of the gun. A few weeks later, Leonetti's application for bail was denied. You have to understand, I was charged in the Pepe Leva murder, and that case got dismissed. I was found not guilty in the Falcone murder, not guilty in the P2P case, and not guilty in the Testa murder. I was 4 for 4. I knew Bobby and the other lawyers had Tommy Dell and the Crow's number down pat, and I was very confident going into the RICO case. Then, those guys won their RICO in North Jersey, and I started thinking, I'm getting the fuck out of here. I thought I had the government on the run. The guys in North Jersey were 20 mobsters associated with Anthony Tumac Achaturo and the New Jersey faction of the Lucchese crime family that he controlled. They had recently been found not guilty of all charges in a massive federal case that had lasted more than 21 months. I figured if those guys could win, we could win. All of us felt confident going into the RICO case because 2 different juries had rejected the testimony of Del Giorno and Caramandi. This was it. This was the big one. If I won this, I was home free. My uncle had to do the 14 years on the Rouse case, and him, Chucky, the Narduccis, Fafi, Lawrence, the Milanos, and Joe Ligambi still had to go to trial for the Flowers murder, but I wasn't in that one, so this was it for me. The stage was set for jury selection on September 10, 1988, in United States v. Nicodemo D. Scarfo, Philip M. Leonetti, et al. This was for all the marbles. The government's team was led by veteran prosecutors Louis Piccini, Arnold Gordon, Joel Friedman, David Fritchie, Albert Wicks, and Joseph Peters, who were armed with a massive indictment that charged Scarfo, Leonetti, and 15 others with participating in 14 murders and attempted murders and a slew of other RICO predicate offenses, including extortion, loan sharking, bookmarking, and the distribution of P2P. The indictment charged the hierarchy of the crime family as follows. Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo, age 59, as being the boss of the crime family. Philip Crazy Phil Leonetti, age 35, as being the underboss of the crime family. Francis Fafi Iannarella, age 41, as being a caporegime, street boss of the crime family. Joseph Chicky Ciancalini, age 53, as being a caporegime in the crime family. Joseph Joe Pungitori, age 32, as being a soldier in the crime family. Nicholas Nick the Blade Virgilio, age 61, as being a soldier in the crime family. Salvatore Chucky Merlino, age 49, as being the one-time underboss and later a soldier in the crime family. Lawrence Yogi Merlino, age 42, as being a former caporegime and later a soldier in the crime family. Charles Charlie White Iannici, age 53, as being a soldier in the crime family. Salvatore Wayne Grand, age 35, as being a soldier in the crime family. Joseph Joey Grand, age 28, as being a soldier in the crime family. Frankie Narducci, age 35, as being a soldier in the crime family. Philip Narducci, age 27, as being a soldier in the crime family. Salvatore Tori Scafidi, age 27, as being a soldier in the crime family. Eugene Gino Milano, age 29, as being a soldier in the crime family. Ralph Jr. Staino, age 56, as being a soldier in the crime family. Anthony Tony Pungitori, age 35, as being a soldier in the crime family. In their opening statement, the government promised to give the jurors a window into the world of La Cosa Nostra, focusing on crimes committed between 1976 and 1987, the heyday of Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo and his nephew Philip Crazy Phil Leonetti. The trial started at the end of September after a few weeks of jury selection and went all the way through October and into November. Every day was the same routine. They would wake us up around 5 a.m. and transport us to court in a bus with tinted windows. We would be handcuffed and shackled on the bus, and they would lead us into the courthouse to a basement holding cell, where we would get dressed and would be in the courtroom by 9 a.m. The trial was basically Tommy Dell and the Crow, and a bunch of FBI agents and cops who had followed us for years. They had some audio tapes and a ton of pictures. They even brought Joe Salerno in to testify against us, and they had a bunch of bookmakers and drug dealers we had shaken down. The further the trial went, the more it became apparent that we were literally fighting for our lives, and that the government was playing for keeps. They wanted us real bad. By the end of October, I think we were all worn down. We'd have some good days here and there, and then we would have some really bad days. The trial was definitely taking its toll on all of us. What would happen next would bring Philip Leonetti to tears and further demonstrate the evil nature of his uncle, Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo. So one day, while the Crow was on the stand, we took our regular afternoon break. We would all go back into a holding pen, and there were these little conference rooms where we could meet with the lawyers when they came back. So Bobby comes back and calls me and my uncle into one of the conference rooms and says, "I got some bad news." And you could just tell by looking at Bobby that it was bad. It was written all over his face. And Bobby says, "Nick, you're going to want to sit down for this one." And my uncle said, "What is it, Bob?" And Bobby said, "Mark tried to kill himself this morning. They found him hanging in the bathroom of Scarf Inc. They flew him from Atlantic City to Philadelphia on a helicopter, and he is in ICU at Hahnemann Hospital. It doesn't look good." I remember welling up with tears and feeling nauseous, like I was going to throw up. This kid was 17 years old and was a beautiful kid, well-behaved, good-looking, always respectful. He was my uncle's youngest son, his baby. And as Bobby's telling us this, Bobby's choked up. I've got tears in my eyes. And my uncle, this no-good, evil motherfucker, has absolutely no reaction, no emotion, nothing. He's just standing there, and he doesn't say a word. A few minutes later, the judge brings us all back into court and announces that court is in recess for the day. You could see all the lawyers whispering to their clients, telling them what happened, and every one of them had the same reaction. They looked sick about it. Even the judge and the prosecutors, who hated my uncle, looked sick. How could you not be when a 17-year-old kid tries to kill himself? But my uncle, this cocksucker, he never flinched, never batted an eye. So now we are all going back down to the holding pen in the basement and waiting for the bus to take us back to Holmesburg. No one is saying a word. Every day after court when we're heading back, we'd always be breaking balls. You gotta remember, there was 17 of us, and we're all looking at spending the rest of our lives in prison, so we had to do something to lighten the mood. But on this day, no one said nothing. It was dead fucking silence. And then, when we all got into the holding pen and sat on the benches waiting for the bus to come, out of nowhere, my uncle went nuts, and he exploded on me. His eyes got real big, and he was pointing at me and saying, "You know, I blame this on you and your mother, the way she would scream and holler at Mark, and that vein would come out of her throat. This is your fault, you and that witch sister of mine. You're just like her." And then he mumbled something to himself in Italian. While this was going on, all the guys we were on trial with were all sitting on the benches that were up against the wall, staring straight at the floor. None of them made eye contact with either one of us, and none of them said a word. Here I am sitting there, absolutely disgusted. Not only was I disgusted over what had happened with Mark, I was also disgusted with myself. I'm 35 years old, and I'm sitting in this holding cell, handcuffed and shackled, and I'm looking at spending the rest of my life in jail. I dedicated every waking moment of my adult life to my uncle and La Cosa Nostra, and this no-good evil motherfucker is going to sit there and blame me for his son trying to... But the thing with me, the thing that always made me smarter than him, is the fact that no one, including him, ever knew what I was thinking or what I was feeling. I could read him like a book. I always knew what he was going to do before he even thought about doing it. He was predictable. Mentally, he played checkers with me, where I played chess with him. At that moment, sitting in that cell listening to him blame me for Mark, I don't know if I have ever felt such a combination of raw emotion and such rage, both at the same time. I'm not the kind of guy who's going to get into a screaming match with anyone, let alone in front of 15 other guys, and let my opponent or adversary know what I was thinking. And at that very moment, he was no longer my uncle. He was no longer my boss. He was my adversary, my enemy. I made up my mind right there in that split second that my life was going to go one of two ways. Number one, if I won the RICO case, I was going to take Maria, little Philip, and my mother, and we were out of here. No more Atlantic City, no more Philadelphia, no more mob, no more of my uncle. I was done with it all. Number two, if I lost the RICO case, I was going to cooperate with the feds. Even if they still gave me 100 years, I didn't care. This was about breaking with my uncle and La Cosa Nostra. It wasn't about jail time. The time didn't matter to me. It never did. If I never saw the light of day, so be it. But I was going to live the rest of my days for me, for Maria, for my son, for my mother. Not for my fucking uncle, and not for his La Cosa Nostra. As the RICO trial continued, with the unrelenting onslaught from the federal prosecutors and the overwhelming depth of the government's case, Leonetti knew that his chances for an acquittal were slim at best. On November 19, 1988, after 2 full days of deliberation, the jury convicted Nicodemo Scarfo, Philip Leonetti, and all 15 co-defendants of every charge in the indictment. In the end, there was too much for us to overcome. All the killings, all the violence, all the treachery. It was almost like we had made it easy for them to convict us. How could they not, with everything they heard? I know this sounds crazy, but when they found us guilty, I felt a huge sense of relief. I knew we were finished, and I knew that this life, La Cosa Nostra, was over for me. Nicky Scarfo Jr., who was running the day-to-day operation of the now decimated crime family, with Anthony Cousin Tony Piccolo, Scarfo Sr.'s first cousin, came to visit both Scarfo and Leonetti behind bars, a few days after the verdict. Nicky Jr. comes in, and he's telling me and my uncle what is going on out in the street. He says nobody's paying, there's no structure anymore. It's every man for himself. He says, I went and saw Bobby the other day, and I told him what was going on, and my uncle says, what did he say? And Nicky says, he said it was over, and that you have no shot on appeal. My uncle said, nothing is over as long as we're still breathing, and he points to me and him. You tell that to Bobby and anyone else who thinks it's over. As long as we're around, it ain't ever over. And Nicky Jr. just nodded. I said, how's Mark doing? And Nicky Jr. said, he's still in a coma, but the doctors say he's going to make it, and that maybe we can bring him home at some point. My uncle says, I can't have him back to Georgia Avenue after what he's done. I got up and left the visit without saying another word. I went back to the cell block, and I picked up the phone, and I called the FBI. Philip Leonetti, who as a teenager served as a mob messenger taking messages from his imprisoned uncle and the family's boss, Angelo Bruno, to their soldiers on the street, became a mob associate in his early 20s, a mob killer at 23, a made man at 27, a capo regime at 28, an underboss at 33, and an acting boss at 34, had now taken steps, at the age of 35, to do the unthinkable, become an informant and cooperate with the government.